Part 21. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 202. Xianfeng Palace. Each of the four corners of the pavilion is inlaid with a vivid phoenix. The wind with a little chill blows by, bringing a hint of chill. Ya Lingxian, wearing a purple skirt, is sitting under the pavilion, chatting and drinking tea with her mother and Aunt Yesiyu. After this forbidden area inheritance, does Sister Lingxian plan to return to Lianji sect to continue practicing? Yesiyu, with brown hair and a dark-colored long skirt, holds her cheek with her hand, and her bright eyes look at Ya Lingxian inadvertently. Without outsiders, Yesiyu seems much more casual. At this time, she sits with her legs crossed, and the dark-colored skirt and the tender white thighs form a sharp contrast, which is extremely charming. Ya Lingxian nodded modestly and smiled, "I'm only going back to the restricted area to receive the inheritance. It's a rare opportunity to learn from all kinds of disciples from Zhuzhu in Lianji section." After the restricted area, he smiled gently, looked at his daughter, and said, "Your talent and hard work are seen by your father and I, but you should relax occasionally and don't push yourself too hard." Ya Lingxian nodded slightly, but before she could speak, a long-toned voice came from the side. "That being said, isn't it because of Brother Mu that you want to return to Lianji sect?" Yesiyu deliberately emphasized the three words Brother Mu to tease Ya Lingxian. Ya Lingxian's pretty face blushed slightly, but she quickly straightened her posture, maintained her indifferent expression, and said, "Brother Mu is only one of the reasons, but not all. That being said, didn't you even let Brother Mu accompany you back to the restricted area?" Yesiyu chuckled. "Sister Siyu," Ya Lingxian bit her lower lip unhappily and gently pushed Yesiyu's arm. Okay, Siyu, you should say less." The forbidden area interrupted at the right time. "This girl is thin-skinned. Although it is the truth, it is better to hide it in the heart." The forbidden area was dignified, but there was a bit of fun in her smile. Ya Lingxian stamped her feet in anger and shouted softly, "Mom! Brother Mu's main purpose of coming back this time is not me." She muttered softly. Yesiyu heard the words, her eyes moved slightly, thinking of a certain existence she saw when she scanned Muzian with her spiritual sense 10 days ago, and suddenly asked, could it be that Muzian came to the forbidden area for the existence in his natural furnace? When she said this, her eyes were fixed on the forbidden area, and her beautiful ember eyes were full of curiosity. Regarding his sister, the forbidden area did not hide anything, and nodded slightly. Yes, one of the purposes of his coming to the forbidden area is to use the reincarnation water to reshape the immortal body for the Green Emperor. Green Emperor? Yesiyu subconsciously looked up at the forbidden area and said, the person in Muzian's body is the Green Emperor. A long time ago, Yesiyu had heard the name of the Green Emperor. She is one of the few strongest people in the world, and also the first generation of the Holy Maiden of the Yaokai Holy Land. Although she has never met her, it is rumored that the fairy is as difficult to touch as the snow lotus on the top of the snow mountain. Ordinary people can hardly talk to her, even if they just want to see her face. It's just that for some reason, the Green Emperor disappeared mysteriously, and no one knows where she went. Unexpectedly, she actually lived in Muzian's body. The one in the Tiansheng furnace at that time was the Green Emperor. When Yesiyu thought of this, she couldn't help but secretly feel lucky. At that time, she used her special physique to secretly check Muzian's physical condition with her spiritual sense. If the Green Emperor had not held back, she would probably have. Brother Mu returned to the restricted area this time for this matter, Ya Lingxian said. Then, she paused and continued, speaking of which, Senior Green Emperor seems to be able to reshape his immortal body in 10 days. Today seems to be the 10th day. Boom. Shortly after the voice fell, a thunder-like sound resounded under the pavilion. Then, a sound like a thunder dragon completely exploded above the restricted area. At this moment, many old monsters who were in retreat in the restricted area opened their eyes one after another. They were first shocked and angry at who dared to wake them up in retreat, and then looked up in the direction of the reincarnation pool. After a while, the shock and anger subsided instantly, retracted their gaze, and silently returned to the secret room to continue meditating and practicing. The Forbidden Zone looked up and suddenly said, "Physical tribulation. Physical tribulation." "Yes," you repeated, looking up in the direction of the reincarnation pool. "So, the Green Emperor's immortal body has been reshaped. If so, Brother Mu should be there too." Lingxuan's eyes flickered slightly, and she stood up immediately. "Mom, Sister Siyu, I'll go over and take a look first." The Forbidden Zone nodded slightly, and Siyu stood up and smiled with narrowed eyes. "I'll go with you. I've never seen a physical tribulation in the Hedeo realm." When Lingxian and Siyu left the Xianfeng Palace, the Forbidden Zone looked up at the two of them, as well as the vast thunder tribulation in the distance, with a hint of doubt in his eyes. In theory, the Green Emperor should only have a body but no cauldron. Then the question is, how can the Green Emperor, who has no spiritual energy, resist this thunder tribulation? I think the Green Emperor should have been prepared. But how should he do it? Behind the restricted area, he silently raised his head and looked into the distance, but there was a hint of doubt in his eyes. At this moment, many Forbidden Area disciples have gathered in front of the forest outside the reincarnation pool. In addition to the Forbidden Area disciples, many elders were also alarmed. At this moment, they walked in the air and looked at the direction of the reincarnation pool. The vision and even hearing of the cultivators are very good. If they want, they can also see roughly even from a long distance. Previously, the fairy in the green skirt used Musian's body to impose a layer of barrier in front of the forest outside the reincarnation pool, isolating everything from the outside world, but now the thunder tribulation has descended, and the barrier has disappeared, so the scene in front of the reincarnation pool has also been reflected in people's vision. "Who is that beautiful lady in the green skirt? I don't seem to have seen her before," someone couldn't help but whispered. "She shouldn't be from the Forbidden Area. If there is such a beautiful fairy in the Forbidden Area, I can't have no impression of her," a disciple next to him said. Many disciples in the Forbidden Area nodded subconsciously and agreed with this person's words. If there is such a fairy in the Forbidden Area, she will definitely have the same popularity as Lingxian, and it is impossible for her to remain unknown. The clan leader told us not to get close to the reincarnation pool before. Could it be because of this fairy in the green skirt? Someone couldn't help but speculate. That's right. This fairy in the green skirt should have been injured before, so she is using the reincarnation pool to recuperate. Maybe she knows the clan leader. This speculation made the heartbeats of the people present involuntarily speed up, and their eyes looking at the fairy in the green skirt were even more fiery. If she really knows the master of the Forbidden Area, the strength of this fairy is likely to be on par with the master of the Forbidden Area. After all, according to what the elder just said, even the return to Void Realm has never seen such a thunder tribulation. But why is Musian there too? Someone suddenly asked. The voices that were just being discussed in a lively manner were quiet for a moment. The same idea popped up in many people's minds. Yes, if this thunder tribulation is the thunder tribulation of the fairy in the green skirt, then what is Musian doing there? Her aura is a little unstable. It is very likely that she was just a spiritual consciousness hiding in someone's body at this time. An elder suddenly spoke quietly and made a guess. This guess directly made the eyes of these disciples looking at Musian change a little. They are not fools. It would be strange if they still couldn't guess it after the elder said so much. Why is Musian in front of the reincarnation pool? It's not that he sneaked in or something, but the fairy Kinkan was in Musian's body before. The purpose of Musian's visit to the restricted area and the previous conversation between the lord of the restricted area and Musian may not be entirely for Lingxian. Healing the fairy Kinkan may also be one of Musian's purposes. This thunder tribulation is also different from the thunder tribulation of ordinary cultivators. It is really the Empress. Another old monster said with emotion, and the eyes looking at the fairy Kinkan were full of respect. In this world, no one will not be in awe when seeing a strong man in the Hedeo realm. Except for a few LSPS, such as Musian. But even Musian had to struggle with his thoughts and will for a long time before he could barely suppress his awe of the fairy in green skirt. By the way, isn't the fairy in green skirt going to pass the tribulation? Why is Musian approaching her? Someone suddenly spoke up. The difficulty of a cultivator's thunder tribulation is completely different for two people and one person. Isn't Musian worried about any problems when he rashly approaches the fairy in green skirt at this time? This time, the elders also did not speak. They did not understand what Musian meant by this operation. Not far behind the crowd, Ye Lingxian stepped on her aunt's flying sword and just arrived at the forest in front of the reincarnation pool. She raised her head and looked through the thick forest at the direction of the reincarnation pool in the distance. At this moment, Musian was walking towards the fairy in green skirt and was approaching her unknowingly. The fairy in the green skirt floated in the air, lowered her head slightly, and gazed at the boy gently, with a faint silver glow on her body, as if she was really a fairy descending to the earth. Is he crazy? Why is he close to the Green Emperor when she is going through the tribulation? Yesiu whispered in disbelief. Ye Lingxuan's eyes flickered slightly, and she also couldn't understand. At this time, Musian had already walked to the reincarnation pool. He looked up at the woman in front of him and hesitated. What should I do now? The fairy in the green skirt's cold and pleasant voice sounded, close your eyes. Musian typed a question mark. Just close it, hurry up, she urged softly. The thunder tribulation is about to fall, there is no time. Musian closed his eyes slightly. The fairy in the green skirt stepped on the water with her snow-white jade feet and took 2 steps forward. Then, under the gazes of the restricted area disciples and Ye Lingxian, he leaned down slightly, pressed one hand on the back of Musian's head, and gently pressed his soft and slightly cool cherry lips against Musian's lips. Outside the forest, the voices that were originally discussing fell silent in an instant. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 203. In the forest outside the reincarnation pool, there was a deathly silence. Under the dark sky, thunder flickered faintly, illuminating everyone's dull faces. Countless eyes stared at a certain direction in the forest. At this time, the fairy in the green skirt put one hand on the back of Musian's head and kissed Musian's lips with her small red lips. Even though it was impossible to see clearly from a distance, the disciples in the restricted area could roughly tell what they were doing from their actions. After an unknown amount of silence, someone finally spoke with difficulty to break the silence. If I'm not mistaken, that fairy is kissing Musian. If the previous speculation was correct, this fairy in the green skirt was most likely a strong man of the same level as the lord of the restricted area, but now she was actually making out with a young cultivator in front of the reincarnation pool. And when the thunder tribulation was about to fall. At this moment, many people looked at Musian with a bit of unconcealed jealousy in their eyes, as if they had eaten a lemon, and their hearts were sour. Judging from the current scene, the relationship between Musian and the fairy in green skirt is obviously not that of an elder and a junior, but a closer one. And if I remember correctly, he and Miss Lingxian should be Taoist couples. In other words, when he already has a saint in the Forbidden Zone, he actually has a close relationship with another woman? Although from the current scene, Musian seems to be passive, and the Empress is the active party. This scene not only made the disciples of the Forbidden Zone fall into deep thought, but also the eyes of several elders on the side were also dull. How could a strong man in the Hedeo realm fall in love with a young cultivator in the refining spirit realm? With this kind of vision, even if he lives in Musian's body every day and communicates every day, he should not become a Taoist couple with him. While everyone was in a daze, not far behind them, there were 2 girls who were also looking at this scene. Is she really the Green Emperor? Yesiyu couldn't help but murmured in a low voice after a brief daze. Then, he immediately reacted and turned his head to look at Ye Lingxian behind him. At this time, Ye Lingxian, who was wearing a purple skirt, was standing quietly on the sword, with a calm expression, examining the fairy in the green skirt who was gently hugging Musian in front of the reincarnation pool. I almost forgot that Musian and Lingxian were Taoist couples. Now seeing this scene. When Yesiyu thought of this, she couldn't help but tentatively said, Lingxian. It seemed that she wanted to say something comforting. Sister Siyu, there is no need to comfort me. They don't really want to be intimate, Ye Lingxian said expressionlessly. As if knowing what Yesiyu was thinking, Ye Lingxian raised her head and stared at her aunt, and continued, have you forgotten what Brother Mu's physique is, Sister Siyu? Yesiyu's mind flashed, and she understood what Ye Lingxian meant, and said, natural furnace cauldron, so, King Di is using this method to obtain spiritual energy for his own use. Ye Lingxian smiled indifferently, fairy sister doesn't have a cauldron now, so she can only ask for spiritual energy from others, and the only one who can do this is Brother Mu. The spiritual energy of the natural furnace cauldron can only be given passively, and the stronger the strength, the more spiritual energy can be obtained. Musian is now in the realm of refining spirits, but the spiritual energy in the natural furnace cauldron has reached the level of returning to the void. With an existence like King Di, there is naturally a way to get a lot of spiritual energy from Musian's natural furnace cauldron, even if it's just a kiss. Although it's for spiritual energy, they are just kissing after all. Yesiyu looked in the direction of the reincarnation pool and complained softly. Ye Lingxian's indifferent smile on her face almost couldn't be maintained. She took a shallow breath and exhaled slowly. Then she said indifferently, it's okay, I've been mentally prepared. But when Ye Lingxian inadvertently retracted her gaze, her seemingly indifferent expression revealed a rare anger. Now it's just a kiss, but what about after that? Could it be that Brother Mu really wants to be with her? After some not so good pictures flashed through Ye Lingxian's mind, she retracted her gaze silently. For a while, the people outside the forest had different thoughts, but they were all incredibly surprised by the action of the green skirt fairy just now. Not only the people in front of the forest, but even the person involved at this time, Musian, was also a little stunned. Then, Musian slowly typed a, "What's going on? I was taken advantage of." He had been coveting the green skirt fairy for a long time, and he didn't even resist such intimacy at all. However, the sudden sneak attack by the opponent still made Musian a little confused. Feeling the soft lips of the fairy in the green skirt, and the slightly cool touch of her lips, the faint fragrance emanating from her body drifted into Musian's nose. Even Musian, who often wandered among the flowers in the past, couldn't help but be intoxicated by it. But when he heard the roar of thunder, Musian quickly woke up and was about to ask the fairy in the green skirt. At this time, he suddenly heard her voice in his ear, "Relax, loosen your teeth." Sister, don't you know what occasion it is now? Be careful of being struck by lightning." Musian just thought of this, and happened to meet the bright and moving blue eyes of the fairy in the green skirt, and soon realized something. The thunder tribulation is gathering now, and in this situation, why would Fairy Kinkin suddenly be intimate with him? If you think about it carefully, Fairy Kinkin's seemingly unreasonable action now is very reasonable. Musian could feel that the spiritual energy in her natural furnace was being guided out by Fairy Kinkin, and indirectly became her spiritual energy. Was she trying to deal with this thunder tribulation? Musian gradually calmed down, and her body relaxed, silently savoring the soft touch of Fairy Kinkin's lips. Then, he took courage and put one hand around Fairy Kinkin's slender waist and hugged her gently. It was obvious that Fairy Kinkin's delicate body trembled slightly, half opened her misty eyes, and looked at Musian faintly. Then she closed her eyes again, silently feeling the feeling of spiritual energy filling her body for a short time, and she couldn't help but feel a little more nostalgic in her heart. She hadn't experienced this feeling of spiritual energy filling her body for a long time. Boom! The thunder in the sky suddenly exploded, and the thunder dragon roared under the sky, as if it wanted to directly smash the two people who were making out under the thunder tribulation. After an unknown amount of time, the fairy in the green skirt slowly opened her eyes and retracted her delicate jade hand that had been forcibly pressing the back of Musian's head. The originally moist and misty green eyes had become transparent and bright, and restored their usual coldness. When their lips parted, the fairy in the green skirt gently exhaled a warm fragrance, and she lightly touched Musian's lips with her fingertips and wiped the corners of his mouth. If you cheat, you have to know how to wipe it clean. Sorry, I did it without saying hello. The fairy in the green skirt's voice, like the sound of nature, seemed to have a little more laziness that was not usually there, and there was an indescribable charm. Musian shook his head and said, I know what the fairy sister is up to. At the end, he raised his head and stared into the eyes of the fairy in the green skirt, and whispered, besides, for you, everything is worth it. He naturally knew that the spiritual energy in his natural furnace had been absorbed by the fairy in the green skirt, but Musian did not resist at that time. In that situation, it seems that no normal man could resist. But, being attacked by someone is still a bit unpleasant. Musian looked at the fairy in the green skirt and nodded slightly, and then turned around and saw the slender back of the fairy in the green skirt, and the faint silver light on her snow-white skin. Suddenly, he took 2 steps forward again and shouted, by the way, fairy sister. As soon as the fairy in the green skirt turned around, she saw Musian approaching and kissing her white face. Then, under the gentle gaze of Fairy Kinkin, Musian grinned and said, this is even. Fairy Kinkin attacked him, and he also attacked Fairy Kinkin, this is fair. Fairy Kinkin raised her eyes slightly, glanced outside the forest inadvertently, and looked at Musian's indifferent smile. I didn't expect that I would also attack, and for some reason, she felt an indescribable sense of pleasure in her heart. She pursed her lips, with a slight smile in her eyes, and said in a calm voice, retreat, so as not to be involved in the thunder tribulation. Musian is a natural spirit, but at such a distance, coupled with the destructive aura of the thunder tribulation gradually accumulating power in front of the reincarnation pool, it is naturally difficult for people to perceive the situation outside. Just now, when Fairy Kinkin took the initiative to kiss Musian, he could still be said to be innocent. What about now? However, these are things to be considered after leaving here. As for now, the fairy in green skirt raised her head and stared at the vast thunder tribulation in the air, and the thunder dragon that was breathing out clouds and mist in the tribulation cloud. Her heartbeat, which had just accelerated a little, gradually slowed down. The fairy in green skirt floated in front of the reincarnation pool, tapped the surface of the pool with her toes, and raised her white hands. A blue lotus slowly rose from her palm. Musian stood in the distance and looked at the Empress who was facing the thunder tribulation alone. Her light dress danced in the raging wind, her skirt fluttered, her hair was blown up by the wind, and her body contained an aura that was enough to make most cultivators worship her. Only at this moment could Musian truly feel the horror of the fairy in green skirt. Is the spiritual energy just now enough? Musian said in a voice transmission. Enough. The fairy in green skirt didn't look at him, and stared at the sky calmly. It's just the 9th thunder tribulation. Boom. In the air, after the thunder dragon swam for a long time and accumulated countless spiritual energy, it finally heard a terrifying roar that shook the 9 provinces. On this day, the rumbling sound from the thunder dragon made countless cultivators tremble. Even though they knew that this thunder tribulation was not near them, they still trembled instinctively. Musian held the tree with one hand, looked up at the fairy in green skirt in the distance, and resisted the urge to sit down. Is this the physical tribulation of the Hedeo realm? Even after going through a physical tribulation, the second thunder tribulation will be much weaker, but it still makes people feel scared. Outside the reincarnation pool, several elders looked at this thunder tribulation with solemn eyes. The shock brought by the fairy in green skirt kissing Musian just now has not yet disappeared. At this time, the destructive aura mixed in the thunder tribulation made everyone tremble slightly, and some people even regretted running to such a place to watch the fun. However, they may not be lucky enough to see such a thunder tribulation for the second time in their lifetime. If they were given another chance to choose, they would still make the same choice. With such a thunder tribulation, she is indeed the empress of the Hedeo realm, right? Someone in the crowd couldn't help but speak softly, with a hint of trembling in his voice. If she is not in the Hedeo realm, there shouldn't be such a terrifying thunder tribulation. The elder on the side spoke slowly. There was also a bit of shock in that voice. And this sentence also made everyone present more certain that this fairy in green skirt is the empress of the Hedeo realm. Even the cultivators in the Return to Void realm are so odd, and only the Hedeo realm can do it. However, there are only a few Hedeo realm masters in Jizhu. Who is this fairy in green skirt? This question flashed through everyone's mind almost at this moment. Look. Is this lotus the same as the one Musian used before? At this time, someone suddenly pointed at the slowly rising green lotus in the air. Everyone looked over, and the eyes of the restricted area disciples who had seen Musian release the green lotus before had some changes. This Musian, did he inherit the legacy of the fairy of green skirt? Someone couldn't help but whisper. The green lotus that Musian used to defeat Zhou that day is almost exactly the same as the one released by the fairy of green skirt at this moment. At this moment, the green lotus radiates light, and the green light covers the entire forest, making many people involuntarily feel the desire to surrender, and even want to kneel down. Several elders looked at each other, then nodded slightly, raised their hands together, and worked together to resist this majesty. Even so, these restricted area disciples still looked at the green lotus with deep awe in their eyes. How did Musian manage to stand beside her without any restraint? Suddenly a voice sounded softly, coming from outside the silent forest. Thunder roared in the sky, but this time, no one answered him. No one has figured out this question until now. Just standing here, they had the urge to surrender to the feet of the green skirt fairy, but when Musian faced the green skirt fairy, he had no fear at all. Think about it carefully. Musian was not only kissed by the green skirt fairy just now, but also took the initiative to kiss her face later. Outside this quiet forest, the thunder dragon, accompanied by a roar, poked out a dragon head as big as half of the forbidden area from the rolling clouds of disaster. It opened its mouth and roared at the green skirt fairy who was calm on the ground, and then, in the flying thunder debris, it fell rapidly. This speed was so fast that no one could react, but the green lotus emitted a soft green light, covering the thunder dragon. The next moment, the size of the thunder dragon seemed to shrink a lot under the light of the green lotus. The green skirt fairy raised her fingertips and flicked out a green seed. The seed grew wildly the next moment, and countless vines rushed out violently, binding the huge body of the thunder dragon. The thunder dragon roared and struggled in the vines, lightning fragments scattered, and dazzling light shot out from its body, as if thousands of dense lava surged out, as if to melt the green vines. On the vines, steam flowed from its body, but the vines still showed no signs of breaking. Instead, the thunder dragon, which was constantly struggling, was being absorbed by the vines, and its body was shrinking. This green skirt fairy was too terrifying. What on earth was that vine that actually absorbed the thunder dragon's spiritual energy? Musian stood in the distance and naturally had the most real feelings. Looking at the thunder dragon's shrinking figure, his heart was full of shock. The thunder dragon's destructive breath just now gradually disappeared with the tightly bound vines. After the spiritual energy was absorbed, the vines were untied. When it just fell from mid-air, this thunder dragon was as big as half of the restricted area, but now that the vines were untied, it was as thin as a small snake. The thunder dragon, which was only as thick as a chopstick, quietly fell to the ground, and then turned into the size of a pill, and fell lightly into the palm of the fairy in green skirt. A thunder tribulation that should have been thrilling ended silently under the seal of the green lotus. The thunder pill in the hands of the fairy in green skirt was now filled with a hint of chaos, and exuded a medicinal fragrance that made people crazy. Bulletin Tien Dan, almost all the elders in the forest blurted out, with fanaticism in their eyes. This pill was not made by the alchemist himself, but was only produced with a probability in the thunder tribulation. Its effect was also difficult for even the cultivators in the return to Void Realm to refuse, and they would even take out all the pills in exchange. However, after seeing the fairy posture of the fairy in green skirt, several elders gradually calmed down. This Bulletin Tien Dan was extremely tempting, but they also knew that it was not something they could touch. Boom! In the whirlpool-like calamity cloud, a deafening thunderclap resounded throughout the restricted area, announcing the end of this thunder calamity. In Juzhu, several eyes that were secretly watching the restricted area also quietly withdrew at this moment. On this day, the Green Emperor reshaped his immortal body, and Juzhu was shocked. According to the history books of the later Dongzhou, on February 18, 473rd year of the Dogon dynasty, the sky revealed a strange phenomenon. In the depths of the restricted area, lightning was everywhere. The people of Dongzhou worshipped and prayed for peace in Dongzhou. Countless cultivators bowed in respect. Of course, the history books did not record that the Empress took the initiative to kiss Muzian in front of the saint of the restricted area. Similarly, there was no record that the Empress was molested by a young cultivator in the realm of refining spirits. Is it over? Muzian looked up at the graceful figure of the fairy in the green skirt and asked. He always felt that these words sounded a bit like setting a flag, but since the thunder and calamity was gone, it must be over. The physical calamity is over. Fairy Kinkan played with the Tian mending pill in her hand, and then casually glanced at Ye Lingxian outside the forest. Fairy Kinkan's eyes quickly returned to Muzian and she smiled brightly. But the real trouble has just begun. She stared into Muzian's eyes and said softly. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 204. The Real Trouble? Muzian stared into the eyes of the fairy in green skirt, and when he noticed that her gaze was fixed on a certain direction, he turned his head and looked. That was the forest outside the reincarnation pool. What was she looking at outside the reincarnation pool for? Muzian hesitated for a moment, and then his eyes froze slightly on a certain direction. Although his natural spirit body was not as good as Ye Lingxian's, he also had a very keen perception of spiritual energy. And now he could clearly sense that Ye Lingxian's breath was not far outside the reincarnation pool. Speaking of which, the thunder tribulation of the fairy in green skirt just now made such a big noise, it was impossible for the people in the restricted area not to notice it, so, they should be secretly observing this thunder tribulation nearby now. Muzian seemed to have thought of something, and the indifferent smile on his face froze slightly. Then, he slowly turned his head and looked at the beautiful profile of the fairy in green skirt, and said, Sister Lingxian is here too. During the previous thunder tribulation, they were waiting outside. Fairy in green skirt paused, glanced at Muzian casually, and continued, but I don't know whether she saw anything or not. This statement was naturally half true and half false. Fairy in green skirt could not have been unaware of whether others were spying here. This woman looked awe-inspiring, and gave people the feeling of a pure lotus. Who knew that she seemed to be a little bit treacherous, and deliberately frightened Muzian at this moment, refusing to tell the truth. After hearing what Fairy in green skirt said, Muzian's expression also became a little more strange. If Ye Lingxian was watching outside the forest just now, it can be basically concluded that she should have seen some not so good scenes. At this moment, Musian felt a sense of enlightenment in his heart. No wonder the fairy looked at him with strange eyes when he took the initiative to kiss her delicate face. At first, he thought that the Empress was shy because she had never experienced love, but now he thought that the fairy must have known who were the people watching the thunder tribulation outside the forest. This fairy was also black when she was cut open. I didn't remind Musian at that time just to give him a surprise. When I get the Tiandan phoenix fruit, I must let you know what it means to suppress the Dao with a refined soul body. Musian calmed down a little and kept himself in a calm state, saying, "Does the fairy sister still need to rely on my body now, or is it no longer necessary?" The fairy in the green skirt smiled, "In your natural furnace, I can continue to nurture my spiritual consciousness, which will be of great help to the subsequent Yuan Shen tribulation." She paused and continued, "However, I can't go back to your body for the time being." "Does the fairy sister have anything else to deal with?" Musian asked. The fairy in the green skirt raised her eyebrows slightly, and the skin under the green skirt exuded a faint silver glow, as if accompanied by the moonlight. She opened her red lips and said, "I have something to say to your girlfriend." Musian hesitated for a moment and said, "What is it? Can you tell me a little?" The fairy in the green skirt glanced at Musian casually and said faintly, "Don't worry, I just chatted with her, and by the way, I gave her some fairy fate." "You are going to her to give her fairy fate now, are you sure you are not attacking her face?" Musian was about to speak to stop her, but the spotless fairy in the green skirt had already walked lightly towards the exit of the forest. Under the dark sky, the green back was still graceful and fairy-like, making everything pale in comparison. "Let's go, what are you daydreaming about?" Her voice sounded vaguely in the forest, which also brought Musian back to his senses. At this point, he couldn't speak to stop her, so he had to follow. "Let's see the situation first, and then stop it when it's absolutely necessary, this is the only way for now." At this moment, outside the forest, all the Forbidden Area disciples looked at the depths of the forest with respect. Just when the thunder tribulation ended, someone found that the fairy in green skirt was leaving the reincarnation pool. Such a being naturally noticed that they were watching the thunder tribulation outside early in the morning, but they just didn't speak. "Elder, who do you think this fairy is?" suddenly a disciple in the crowd asked the Forbidden Area elder beside him. "There are only a few people in the Hedeo realm in Jizhu. In today's world, the return to Void realm is already the peak, and the realms above it cannot be reached by practicing. Moreover, it requires opportunities." And now a strong man in the Hedeo realm appeared in front of them alive, no wonder he was cared about. Obviously, this fairy should be one of the Hedeo strongmen who existed in the world in the past. At this moment, all the disciples in the restricted area were secretly guessing the identity of the fairy in green skirt, but there was too little information about her to figure it out. At this time, an old voice slowly sounded outside the forest. "It is rumored that in the past, in the sacred land of Yaokai, there once appeared a fairy with extraordinary elegance. She was the top genius in Jizhu. She created the pure world green lotus and suppressed the demons in the world. And 1,000 years ago, the demon world in Bizhu was in chaos. The demon emperor led a group of demon cultivators and invaded Dongzhou with great fanfare. However, on the first night of entering Dongzhou, he mysteriously disappeared. The elder means that the first generation of the demon emperor in the demon world was suppressed by the fairy in Yaokai." A disciple immediately reacted and asked, "The appearance of the fairy in the green skirt just now is indeed the same as the fairy in the painting that I have had the honor to see in the past, and the fairy in the painting is the first generation saint of Yaoqi," Qingdi an elder said quietly. "In the past, there were many people in Dongzhou who pursued the fairy of Yaoqi, but no one succeeded. In the end, the fairy of Yaoqi resonated with the great Dao and became the empress. Those cultivators who wanted to pursue her in the past were also discouraged." Another elder revealed the unknown secret. "So, she is the Qingdi." At this moment, many disciples in the restricted area were suddenly enlightened. Few people have seen the image of the fairy in the green skirt, but the name of Qingdi has been seen in ancient books in the past. Unexpectedly, this time they have the honor to see Qingdi transcend the tribulation. A strong man in the Hedeo realm is very rare, and the thunder tribulation of the Hedeo realm is enough to be recorded in the history books. Such a rare scene, they are lucky enough to see it. At this moment, many disciples in the restricted area were full of ambition and fighting spirit, vowing to work hard to practice and catch up with the pace of the Green Emperor. For a moment, the voices outside the forest suddenly became extremely excited and lively, until this moment, another voice suddenly came. Speaking of which, just now, Senior Green Emperor and Miss Lingxuan's Taoist partner were intimate. Did we see it wrong? Or do they have a special relationship? For a moment, the lively forest was instantly silent, and the whole forest seemed to be silent for a long time. More people looked at Ye Lingxian behind them intentionally or unintentionally. For such a look, Ye Lingxuan's face was still calm, saying, "This matter involves some secrets. Remember not to spread it everywhere when you leave this place." "Miss, do you know the inside story?" someone couldn't help asking. "I know, but this matter cannot be mentioned. It involves too much," Ye Lingxian said lightly. This sounds a bit like saying, those who understand will understand, and those who don't understand will not understand, and there is a conflict of interest, so I'll keep it secret, this feeling. You must remember, whether it is the matter of the Green Emperor or what happened just now in front of the reincarnation pond, don't spread it randomly outside this place. Several elders also spoke. Disciple understands, everyone expressed their opinions. Then, they whispered again. Think about it carefully, if there is no special reason, how could a female emperor be interested in a young cultivator in the refining spirit realm? In the past, I have seen the description of the green skirt fairy in ancient books. There were countless young talents pursuing her at the time, but she never chose a Taoist partner, but walked alone on the road of cultivating immortals, and finally became one of the few female emperors in Zhuzhou. Yes, I think there is a special reason for choosing Musian. But didn't you think that the young lady looked down on those young talents in the outside world before, but this time she came back with a Taoist partner? As soon as the voice fell, many disciples in the restricted area stared at the person who spoke, with a look of "don't speak if you can't speak." It's not that they don't understand this kind of thing, but in this situation, they can only use this kind of words to comfort themselves. With the appearance of the fairy in the green skirt, who wouldn't want to have a kiss with her? But does anyone dare? Let alone a kiss with her, if she stood in front of them now, they wouldn't dare to look at her easily. This is not because of a cowardly mentality, but because the aura of the other party's Hedeo realm is naturally suppressive to cultivators of lower realms. There are very few who can resist this aura. Ye Lingxian is one, Musian is one. In addition, there are the younger sister behind the restricted area, and the geniuses Yegan and Yeqing in the restricted area. However, among these people, only Musian is the most outstanding one. These geniuses may dare to face the Green Emperor when facing the fairy in the green skirt. However, the only person who dares to take the initiative to kiss the fairy in the green skirt, or even tease her, is probably Musian. The disciples in the restricted area are jealous of Musian, but they also admire his courage. If it were someone else, just standing in front of the fairy in the green skirt, I'm afraid they would tremble and their heads would go blank, not to mention making such an intimate move. They are coming out. At this time, an elder suddenly looked up and said to the depths of the forest ahead. Everyone looked up and saw Musian and the other two walking out of the forest. The woman in the lead was so beautiful that it was breathtaking. Everyone subconsciously avoided her wherever her eyes passed. Every inch of her skin seemed to emit a crystal silver glow, as if she did not belong to the mortal world. Although she restrained her own aura, she still made people feel awe from the bottom of their hearts. and the nobleman in the black and gold robe next to the fairy in the green skirt did have a good appearance, and he exuded a calm and gentle temperament. His dress was quite luxurious, but he did not feel any nouveau riche because Musien's temperament and even appearance were able to control the dress of such a nobleman. Many female cultivators in the restricted area secretly glanced at Musien, with a little brilliance in their eyes. Even in the restricted area, the chaos body is still a unique and rare physique. The more outstanding a person is, the more likely they are to attract the attention of the opposite sex. Musien has not performed much so far, but just defeating Johao and even the attitude of the fairy Kinkan who favors him are enough to attract the attention of many female cultivators. Several elders immediately stepped forward and greeted him, bowing respectfully and saying, "Senior Kingdi." The fairy Kinkan nodded slightly, and her eyes fell on Ye Lingxian at the end of the crowd. Many people noticed the fairy Kinkan's gaze and turned their heads to look. When they saw their young lady walking forward, many people's minds gradually became active. Musien is the Taoist partner brought by the young lady, and just now this Taoist partner kissed the fairy Kinkan for some special reasons. The young lady said that she could understand Kingdi, but could she really be as calm and composed as she just showed? Looking at Ye Lingxian who walked forward, everyone was a little curious. Finally, Ye Lingxian came to the fairy in green skirt. The purple long skirt set off her snow-white skin and pretty face, adding a bit of classical elegance to the girl. Her eyes were clear and bright, and her slender figure made her most likely to attract the attention of her peers. She looked at the fairy in green skirt, seemingly without any fear, and smiled, "Fairy sister, it seems that your body has recovered." The fairy in green skirt shook her head slowly, "It's still a little short, but it's almost there. She has only reshaped her fairy body now, but if she wants to truly recover, she still needs the help of the Tiandan Phoenix fruit and Musien. However, this is only a matter of time." "In that case, I'm relieved," Ye Lingxian said with a smile, "then fairy sister can return to the holy land of Yaokai and revive the glory of Yaokai in the past." The underlying meaning of this is, don't get close to Brother Mu after your body recovers. Although Miss Ye Lingxian usually behaves quite mature and elegant, she is actually very selfish in terms of feelings. The appearance of Fairy Kinkan and her intimate behavior towards Musien just now made Ye Lingxian feel a sense of crisis and a little hostility. If this great white shark swims into the fish pond, it will definitely suffocate the other fish in the pond that are still growing. Fairy Kinkan raised her lips slightly and smiled faintly, "We should wait until later to decide what to do after the body recovers. But I have no plans to leave for the time being." Ye Lingxian was silent for a while. "Senior is the Empress, a person of the same generation as my father, and being with Brother Mu, a young cultivator of 17 or 18 years old, after it gets out, people may criticize you. It seems to be a friendly reminder, but in fact it is a disguised mockery of the old Emperor Qing Niang eating tender grass." The disciples in the restricted area trembled in their hearts, their eyelids twitched wildly, and they wished they could turn around and leave the place on the spot. These words were not what they could listen to. Now the young lady and the fairy in green skirt are in a friendly chat, but after the two calm down, those who heard these conversations may be in trouble. Even several elders are a little bit overwhelmed at this moment. They wanted to say several times that they wanted to leave this place, but they couldn't break this terrifying atmosphere at this time. If they speak now, they may be besieged by the two. At this moment, a voice like spring breeze suddenly came, "If you are okay, please leave here." "After this, we still have something to say," Musien continued. When everyone heard the words, they couldn't help but be slightly stunned, and then after a while, they reacted and looked at Musien with more gratitude in their eyes, and they all clasped their fists to thank him. "Master Mu, see you another day." "Master Mu, take care." "See you another day, Master Mu." Many people who were originally jealous of Musien gave the most sincere blessings. Some people even looked at Musien with sympathy in their eyes. No matter who these two women are, they are all goddesses that people admire when they are alone. The fairy in the green skirt is very good, and Ye Lingxian is also very good. But the two together, that's not very good. At least the current atmosphere, even for outsiders, has a kind of inexplicable feeling of fear. Yesiyu played with a strand of brown hair, looked at Musian for a few times, and said in a voice transmission, "You are quite courageous, you dared to flirt with Lingxian and be affectionate with the Green Emperor. But you are still responsible and have no intention of taking the opportunity to escape," she continued. Musian shook his head gently and said in a voice transmission, "Sister Siyu, what do you think of me? In this situation, how can I escape alone?" At the end, he looked up at Yesiyu, who was floating in the air with a sword not far away. Although this woman is the younger sister of the Queen of the Forbidden Zone, she obviously has the mind of a young girl. The dark-colored skirt outlines her long white legs with golden ratios. The belt is lightly tied around her waist. At this moment, she looks like she is watching the excitement and is not afraid of trouble. She is looking at this place with interest. Musian gave her a gentle smile and continued to transmit, "Leave this to me, Sister Siyu." Yesiyu looked at Musian for a few times. When she saw the young man's calm smile, she couldn't help but have a little more curiosity in her eyes. This guy, how is he going to deal with these two people? However, Yesiyu also knew that this was not the time to talk, so she nodded slightly, put her hands behind her back, followed the elders, and left the forest. As Yesiyu left, Musian's originally indifferent smile suddenly collapsed. All the calmness are all fake. If possible, Musian would like to leave, but... Looking at the figures of Fairy Kinkan and Ye Lingxian, Musian sighed quietly in his heart. How am I going to go now? If you leave now, you're not sure what will happen here. We are monks, and our age cannot be judged by the years in the human world. In the past, there were good stories of masters and disciples finally getting together. Fairy Kinkan smiled faintly, stared at Ye Lingxian, and answered what she just said. Then, he shook his head and said, "You are actually a little too worried. I am only caring about the younger generation, little friend Mu." Ye Lingxian said expressionlessly, "I know. Musian is a natural furnace cauldron, and Fairy Kinkan just asked for a kiss just to get the aura of the natural furnace cauldron." Of course she knew this. But then Musian took the initiative to kiss Fairy Kinkan. This should have nothing to do with asking for spiritual energy, right? Ye Lingxian glanced at Musian faintly. Fairy Kinkan raised her lips slightly and said with a faint smile, "Although the reincarnation pool has reshaped my physical body this time, if I want to maintain my physical body, I still need the heavenly pill phoenix fruit, so I will continue to sleep in his body for a while. As for your emotional problems, I have no intention of getting involved, so don't worry." After Fairy Kinkan finished speaking, her body seemed to gradually become translucent, and then the next moment, she disappeared from sight, leaving only a voice floating lightly in the air. "Just think of this pill as my compensation for Sister Lingxian." A pill exuding thunder shards then floated in front of Ye Lingxian. If those elders had not left just now, they would have been so excited that they would have wanted to grab it and take care of it carefully. Heaven building pill, if you take this pill, you will have the opportunity to reach the realm of enlightenment after returning to the void in the future. However, Ye Lingxian just looked at the pill in front of her coldly, but never reached out to take it. He just looked at Musian faintly. If Fairy Kinkan took the initiative to kiss Musian at first, it could be said that it was for the spiritual energy of the Tian Tian furnace, but then Musian took the initiative to kiss her back, then it had nothing to do with the Tian Tian furnace. Moreover, Musian and Fairy Kinkan had been kissing for such a long time at that time. If they said it was just a simple kiss, no one would believe it. Musian picked up the sky-building pill, handed it to Ye Lingxian, and said with a smile, "Sister Lingxian, put it away." Ye Lingxian turned her face away and said calmly, "If I accept this pill, wouldn't it be as if I sold Brother Mu to Sister Fairy? I can't accept this pill. When he finished speaking, there was a rare coldness in his eyes. The saint in the restricted area still has some integrity. The fairy in the green skirt kissed her brother Mew in front of her. After the kiss, he gave her a pill. Is this some kind of selling a husband to ask for pills? Muzian did not persuade him, he just put away the heaven-building pill first. After all, with Yalingxuan's personality, it is absolutely impossible for her to accept the elixir given by the Qing Emperor now. She has to wait until her anger subsides before slowly operating it. When he thought of this, Muzian's eyes quickly returned to Yalingxian. Looking at the girl's slightly cold pretty face, he couldn't help but reach out and grab one of her soft little hands. He gently pulled her into his arms, looked down at the little beauty in his arms, and said softly, "Are you still angry?" Yalingxian gently pushed Muzian, turned away, and said softly, "Brother Mew is just helping Sister Xianzi, I know this. But just now you took the initiative to kiss her again." When she said this, she lost her voice, lowered her eyes slightly, and there seemed to be some darkness in her eyes. Muzian gently hugged the girl's delicate body and sighed softly. The situation was urgent at that time. "You should know that I am a natural furnace. I can give the other party spiritual energy at close contact." Yalingxian obviously didn't believe this reason, and said softly, "Sister Fairy had already asked for enough spiritual energy at that time, so she let go of you, right? But after that, you took the initiative to kiss her." She felt inexplicably sour, and she even began to understand how her sister felt at that time. Muzian smiled bitterly and said, "As the saying goes, caring leads to chaos. I am also worried that Senior Kingdi's spiritual energy is not enough." He lowered his head and stared at the little beauty in his arms, and said softly, "If you are angry, after you go back today, I will let you do whatever you want, okay? You say you let me do whatever you want, but I can't restrict Brother Mew's actions." When Yalingxian said this, as if he thought of something, he raised his head and looked at Muzian. "By the way, Brother Mew, do you still remember what you promised me before?" Under Muzian's doubtful gaze, Yalingxian said quietly, "If I see you being intimate with other girls, can I keep you in the restricted area forever?" Boom! At this time, a deafening thunder sounded in the sky, as if it was about to shatter the sky. Muzian was trembling, and subconsciously looked up into the air. Senior Kingdi's thunder tribulation should be over. Why is there still a thunder tribulation? And when this thought flashed through his mind, he saw in the dark clouds, an unknown object as dazzling as the sun quietly penetrated the dark clouds and moved slowly towards their direction like a swimming dragon. "Come flying." A group of disciples who were leaving the reincarnation pond also noticed something unusual in the sky. They all looked up and almost lost their voices. The lock of desolate time. In the restricted area, there are two major inheritances. One is the ancestral weapon of the restricted area, the lock of the wilderness. The second is the sacred object that makes countless people crazy, the Chi of heaven. If the user of the lock of desolate time is strong enough, it can even bind a strong person in the alliance realm for a short period of time. As for the Chi of heaven, only each inheritor knows its effects. Why does the lock of desolate time appear now? Doesn't it only choose its master when the inheritance begins? Someone couldn't help but murmured in a low voice. Maybe it's because Senior Qing Emperor's previous thunder disaster affected the time when the inheritance started, an elder said softly, staring in the direction of the inheritance place. What the elder means is that the inheritance may have started now, asked the restricted area disciple on the side. But where did this lock of desolate time fly to? Many people's eyes were looking at the lock of desolate time shining with dazzling golden light under the dark sky. It was not until they saw it falling into the mountain forest near the reincarnation pond that their eyes became slightly clear. It looks like it really chose miss. This result is not surprising, and it can even be said to be something that everyone could have expected a long time ago. At this time, in the mountain forest in front of the reincarnation pool, Muzian looked at the golden chain that landed lightly in Yelingsuan's palm, with a hint of hesitation in his eyes. A thought flashed through his mind, what is this thing? Thoughts flashed in Muzian's mind, and then, he suddenly remembered what Fairy Kinkin said about the ancestral weapon. When his eyes returned to the golden chain, something changed in his eyes. The ancestral weapon of the restricted area, the lock of the wilderness. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 205. The Lock of Desolate Time. Muzian had never seen this ancestral weapon before, and had never even seen the relevant introduction in any book. However, he had come into contact with similar magic weapons before when he was in the Liangyi sect. The Tao practiced by Huabao Feng is related to the enlightenment of the weapon spirit. Judging from the current performance of the Lock of Desolate Time, it is likely that it is also a divine object with a weapon spirit. This golden chain looked like an ordinary string, surrounding Yelingxian, and it looked very intimate and gently touched her face. This Lock of Desolate Time seems to be an object inspired by the spirit of the weapon. Muzian looked at the Lock of Desolate Time and asked. Yelingxian gently stroked the Lock of Desolate Time and nodded. Every time the inheritance is opened, the Lock of Desolate Time will choose its own owner. The one who can be recognized by it will be the next owner of the restricted area by default. The Lock of Desolation Time surrounded Yelingxian, and after a while, it quickly left her and wandered around Muzian, looking equally very intimate. It seems to be very affectionate to me too. Muzian discovered a blind spot. He has never seen this restricted area ancestor artifact. Why is this thing so friendly to him? In a sense, the Lock of Desolate Time can communicate with the master's mind, Yelingxian said. Muzian was thoughtful and reached out to gently touch this ordinary-looking golden chain. In other words, Sister Lingxian likes me, so Lock of Desolate Time will also like me. It should be said that it is indeed the ancestor of the restricted area. It is indeed different from ordinary artifacts. At this time, the locks of Desolate Time suddenly rioted inexplicably, wrapped around Muzian's body for an instant, and then quickly bound his hands and wrists. Muzian reacted very quickly and wanted to pull out his hand in an instant, but unexpectedly noticed that his spiritual energy quickly returned to the cauldron the moment it was about to surge. Can this Lock of Desolate Time restrict the spiritual energy of others? Muzian's eyes moved slightly, realizing the secret. It can limit other people's spiritual energy, and the time centered on it will be changed. A day in the eyes of Brother Mu may only be an hour in the eyes of outsiders. Yelingsuan's small red lips were slightly jong, his eyes were fixed on Muzian. The Lock of Desolate Time, like the ancestral land inherited from the Forbidden Zone, can slow down the entire time. However, the former is an ancestral weapon, while the latter is the cave heaven. So, the Lock of Desolate Time is a time pause in a small area. Muzian thought of some bad images in his mind. Then, he seemed to have thought of something important again, and looked up at the girl standing in front of him. By the way, you just said that the Lock of Desolate Time decides its actions based on the owner's thoughts. Doesn't this mean that the Lock of Desolate Time will wrap around him just now, and that was Yelingsuan's idea? Yelingxian winked playfully. The Lock of Desolate Time will occasionally act without authorization. Not all actions are my ideas. I don't have any bad intentions towards Brother Mu, she continued. With her pretty face, innocent expression, and even her cute clothes, people who didn't know Yelingxian would probably just think of him as a person. The flawless goddess. But it is obvious that the Lock of Desolate Time will restrain Muzian at this moment. It must be the idea that Yelingxian just had. Muzian stared at Yelingsuan's smiling face, his eyes full of doubt. After being stared at for a long time, Yelingxian sighed quietly and said, "Okay, actually, I was really thinking about whether to herd my brother to the Yaokai Holy Land just now." Yelingxian is naturally very confident about her appearance. Although she behaved very low-key in Tianqian City in the past, her appearance and temperament still attracted many suitors. When Liangyi sect returned to the restricted area before, the number of suitors suddenly increased significantly. However, facing Fairy Kinkan, Ye Lingxian still felt a sense of crisis. In terms of beauty, she is naturally not inferior to the fairy in Kinkan, but this empress is obviously not the kind of person who will gradually talk about fair competition with you. This can be seen from the way Fairy Kinkan held Musian forcefully and kissed him. Fairy Kinkan dared to be so unscrupulous in the restricted area. If Musian went to the Yaokai Holy Land later, seemingly thinking of some bad scenes, Ye Lingxian shook her head gently, as if she wanted to clear away the messy scenes in her mind. At this time, Ye Lingxian suddenly felt the warm touch of a palm on her cheek. She raised her head slightly and saw Musian's hands bound by the locks of desolation were raised, gently stroking her pretty face. "Sister Lingxian, you should give me a little more trust. I have promised Senior Kingdi before, do you want me to go back on my word?" Musian asked softly. With a somewhat complicated look in Ye Lingxuan's eyes, she raised her head and glanced at Musian, and said, "What if Brother Mu goes and can't come back? With the appearance of the fairy in the green skirt, if she returns to the Taoist realm after reshaping the cauldron, will she really let Mu Jian leave?" Ye Lingxian couldn't help but feel suspicious. Musian shook his head helplessly, "No matter what, I will come back to you." At the end of his sentence, he stared lovingly into Ye Lingxuan's eyes. "Besides, do you think I am willing to abandon the eldest lady in our restricted area?" Under Musian's affectionate and sincere gaze, Ye Lingxuan's eyes remained unchanged. She raised her snow-white chin reservedly and elegantly and said, "Who knows whether Brother Mu will be fascinated by Sister Fairy then?" And Ye Lingxian paused. A pair of autumn-like peach blossom eyes reflected the young man's face, her fingertips lightly touched his lips. "Brother Mu seemed to have said before that if I see you being intimate with other girls, can I punish you?" A gust of wind blew through the mountain forest, rustling the leaves, causing Ye Lingxuan's skirt to lift slightly in the wind. She was wearing a pair of small embroidered shoes with cloud patterns on her feet, revealing her white and smooth insteps, and her figure was slim and elegant. How could she still remember? After a brief hesitation, Musian calmed down his emotions well, looked up at Ye Lingxuan's eyes, and sighed softly, "I deserve this too, Sister Lingxian. You can punish me however you want." Regarding punishment, Musian didn't mind very much, because he knew that Ye Lingxuan's character would not do anything too outrageous. Rather, he was quite looking forward to it. For example, Ye Lingxian asked him to lie on the grass nearby, and then was stepped on by the future restricted area Queen Ye, looking at him with that kind of joyful eyes. No, this seems to be a sentiment rather than a punishment. Ye Lingxian glanced at Musian secretly, frowned slightly, and said softly, "I always feel that Brother Mu is thinking of something bad." Then, she looked at Musian and continued, "Before letting go of Brother Mu, I want to ask you one more question. Brother Mu, who do you think is more beautiful, Sister Xianzi or me?" Musian looked back at Ye Lingxian and said softly, "You are cuter." Ye Lingxuan's eyebrows relaxed slightly, and the corners of her mouth outlined a slight arc. Musian always stared at Ye Lingxian tenderly, never looking away. He just said cute, not pretty. After all, it is still not certain whether Fairy Kinkan is sleeping or not. Musian even seriously doubts that the Empress has never slept since she entered her natural furnace. The current answer is not perfect, but at least it pleases Ye Lingxian and does not offend Fairy Kinkan. When he glanced at the lock of desolation time that had left his body and surrounded Ye Lingxian, Mu Jian slowly breathed a sigh of relief. Finally got it done. The threat of this lock of desolate time is too great. Ye Lingxian, who is in the Qi training realm, can threaten the God refining realm. If we reach the return to void realm in the future, wouldn't it be possible to limit even the enlightenment realm to a certain time? After all, he is the protagonist, and as expected, leapfrog combat is standard. Muzian couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Then, he looked at the lock of desolate time, and for no apparent reason, he thought of what some of the girls around him had in common. Fairy Kinken's vines that just dealt with the thunder tribulation can absorb spiritual energy, Sister Linksuan's lock of desolate time can bind other people's spiritual energy, Ruoxi's concentric lock can directly tell whether a person is lying. They all seem to have locks. Although it should be a coincidence, if I really end up with them in the future, I have to take precautions in advance. While Muzian was thinking about such things, Ye Lingxian raised his head and looked towards the sea to the north of the restricted area. In the sky in that direction, there were rolling dark clouds at the moment, and among the dark clouds, there seemed to be a soft golden light flashing, making the dark clouds in the sky shake violently. Muzian looked up and said, "What is that?" "The inheritance of the restricted area," Ye Lingxian said. "It seems that the ancestral land should be opened. Once she accepts the inheritance of the restricted area, her cultivation speed will skyrocket, and after that..." As if she had thought of something, the girl couldn't help but have a little hope in her eyes. Then, she quickly calmed down her thoughts, turned to look at the young man beside her, and said, "Brother Mu, do you want to go and have a look together? Maybe you can also get some inheritance from the ancestral land." Muzian pondered for a moment, nodded and said with a smile, "That's fine. As we all know, people who are close to the protagonist can basically share a sip of soup with the protagonist." Muzian didn't care about the soup. After all, he could slowly make up for it with Ye Lingxian in the future. However, he is still very curious about the inheritance of the restricted area itself. Within the restricted area, the status of the ancestral land is undoubtedly the most sacred and inviolable. As for the reason, it is related to the rumors that have been circulated in the restricted area in the past. According to rumors, this ancestral land of the Forbidden Area seems to be a cave created by the first queen of the Forbidden Area, the reincarnated queen. She was a woman of unparalleled magnificence. Although her traces have been erased by time, she left her legacy to future generations. In this ancestral land, every disciple with the forbidden bloodline can receive the inheritance from the ancestral land. Every few years, the ancestral land is open to the public. However, this year's ancestral land inheritance is the most lively one ever. The reason is attributed to the birth of a saint in the restricted area who is most consistent with the inheritance of the ancestral land. That is, the future queen of the Forbidden Zone, Ye Lingxian. This was a scene worthy of being recorded in history, and it naturally made the disciples and even the elders in the restricted area very concerned. At this moment, in front of a huge sea area, many people have gathered in front of the ancestral land, communicating lively. "I heard from the elders of the clan that today's thunder tribulation is the physical tribulation of the powerful people in the Hedeo realm. Is this true?" a Forbidden Area disciple asked with a somewhat curious tone. Although he did not see the thunder tribulation of the Green Emperor at the scene, the terrifying aura at that time was probably noticed by all the cultivators in the entire Dongzhou, not to mention the Forbidden Area. Some powerful people in the Return to Void realm, even in other places in Zhuzhou, can feel the vast aura of thunder tribulation. This time the ancestral land will be opened in advance. It seems to be affected by the thunder tribulation, right? Another Forbidden Area disciple said. If it were normal times, most people would be discussing the affairs of the ancestral land at this time, but the previous movement of the Green Emperor's tribulation was too loud, which would inevitably attract people's attention. "Yagan, you seemed to be there at the time, right? Was it a thunder tribulation in the Hedeo realm?" a Forbidden Area disciple asked. For a moment, many people looked at the pride of the restricted area. Yagan just nodded lightly and stopped talking. The scene he saw outside the reincarnation pool at that time was such a huge blow to the great genius in the restricted area that he is still a little autistic now. Isn't the lifelong pursuit of a cultivator to resonate with the great Dao after enlightenment and enter the state of unity? However, although Musian's realm is average, he has long been holding on to the thigh of the Green Emperor. Even before that, the Green Emperor took the initiative to kiss Musian. Thinking of his own lady who is also obsessed with Musian, it is impossible not to discourage people. What women will only affect my cultivation speed is a lie. Who would not be jealous of a talented and beautiful female cultivator? At this time, someone suddenly asked, "Do you think Musian will come to this ancestral inheritance? What is he doing? He is not from the restricted area. Is he here to watch the show?" Someone on the side couldn't help but complain. That's not necessarily true. Since he has been recognized by the reincarnation pool, are you so sure that the ancestral land will not recognize him? A female cultivator on the side immediately refuted. Yetching, a beautiful woman in a blue skirt, was as elegant and charming as a young woman. She said softly, "Since the reincarnation pool has recognized Musian before, the ancestral land may really recognize him. Yes, judging from Mr. Mu's previous performance, there may be hope immediately." Another person spoke up to support Musian. If you listen carefully, it is not difficult to distinguish that these people who spoke up are basically female cultivators. These restricted area disciples were silent for a while. Among these people who spoke up, some were their childhood sweethearts, some were their sisters or even younger sisters. In this case, they naturally couldn't say anything more. "I don't know what means that guy used to get along with so many girls at the same time." These people naturally didn't expect that while they were working hard to practice, Musian was secretly working hard to open up wasteland and make friends with the tribesmen in the restricted area during this period. Shortly after this topic ended, someone suddenly shouted, "It's the young lady, she's here too." Everyone turned their heads and saw Ya Lingxian walking towards them from a distance, and the boy beside her. Musian. Because of what Yetching said just now, many people present at this moment couldn't help but feel a little more expectant when they saw Musian. The Forbidden Zone ancestral land is a sacred place where only those with the Forbidden Zone bloodline can receive inheritance. But before, Musian did not have the Forbidden Zone bloodline but was also recognized by the reincarnation pool. Now no one knows whether the ancestral land will recognize Musian. "Sister Lingxian is so beautiful, why are they all staring at me?" Musian noticed that everyone's eyes were looking at him intentionally or unintentionally, and his eyes couldn't help but have a little more strangeness. Ya Lingxian turned her head to glance at Musian, and said teasingly, "Brother Mu is more popular than me. You should know why they are looking at me, right?" Musian gently pinched Ya Lingxuan's face. "They just want to see if I can get the recognition of the ancestral land. Then Brother Mu, just give it a try. There's nothing to lose, right?" Ya Lingxian said with a smile. "And, maybe Brother Mu can really get the recognition of the ancestral land." Musian looked up at the round archway that was a faint blue color not far ahead, and then nodded slightly, "That's right. Since they care so much, let's give it a try." After all, he also cared a little about whether he could get the recognition of the ancestral land. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 206. At dawn, Musian stood on the cliff of the valley near the sea, overlooking the sea. At this moment, a mirror that seemed to penetrate the sky and the earth appeared on this sea. According to some people in the Forbidden Area, this is the inheritance place of the Forbidden Area, and it is also the ancestral land of the reincarnated queen who first created the Forbidden Area. From the beginning, many disciples of the Forbidden Area have come to the sea area one after another. Obtaining the inheritance of the Forbidden Area means that one's own bloodline will be further improved, which is of great benefit to future cultivation. "Fairy sister, is there any way to enter the ancestral land or something like that?" Musian suddenly spoke in his heart when he approached the mirror on the sea, trying to communicate with the green skirt fairy. The ancestral land is a cave created by the reincarnated queen. I have never come into contact with it. The voice of the green skirt fairy sounded like the sound of nature in Musian's heart. You are still not asleep? Musian complained in his heart. He just asked the fairy in green skirt. Wanting to enter the ancestral land was only a small reason. Another major reason was to see whether the fairy in green skirt was sleeping in his cauldron or peeping out from his cauldron. Now it seems, this empress may not have been sleeping in his body from the beginning. In a few days, we will go to the holy land of Yaokai. During this period, I have to ensure your safety. If you sleep, there may be accidents. The fairy in green skirt replied softly. Well, I pretended to believe it. Musian complained silently in his heart. At this time, an elder's voice came from below. Young friend, you go and try it. Musian came back to his senses, glanced at the elders in the valley, then arched his hands and flew lightly towards the direction of the sea. On the edge of the sea, there stood 9 stone tablets that looked quite ancient. And the stone tablets depicted the appearance of a woman. The 9 stone tablets, each of which had a different posture, but the image was the same. It is rumored that the reincarnation queen has lived through 9 lives, and she lived for 5,000 years in each life. The title of reincarnation queen was also given by the elders in the forbidden area in the past. People in later generations do not know her real name. Yalingxian followed Musian and whispered softly. So the name of reincarnation queen was given by the elders in the forbidden area. Later, Musian looked up and stared at the 9 stone tablets in front of him, and his heart was slightly clear. What is the mirror? Musian's eyes quickly fell on the huge mirror in the distant sea. The cave is also one of the secrets left by the reincarnation queen. People standing on the mirror can see their future appearance, Yalingxian said. Then, there seemed to be a little more expectation in those bright eyes. Although she always behaves very calmly on weekdays, Yalingxian actually cares about her figure. Now the scale of development is not very good, and it can be explained by the reason that she is a young girl. But what about in a few years? If it is still like this, it is a bit sad. In the eyes of outsiders, this restricted area lady is a flawless goddess. Both her figure and face are top-notch, and her tender white feet are as perfect as a flawless white jade. However, probably no one would have thought that this nearly perfect girl also has regrets. But this is not surprising. Among the girls Yalingxian knows, her breasts are the slowest to develop, although it can't be said to be smooth, and even a little big, but for a girl, this size is obviously not enough. After all, even her younger sister Yeqian's figure is much better than hers. At this time, there was a burst of exclamations and praises from behind, and Musian looked up and saw Yesiu, who had just stepped into the mirror. She was wearing a dark-colored knee-length skirt and a pair of small short boots embroidered with plum blossoms. Her snow-white skin looked white and clear against the dark-colored clothes, and it was breathtakingly beautiful. But Musian's sight was quickly attracted by the queen in the mirror. The woman in the mirror also had brown hair, but the hair that originally fell to the back naturally fell to the calf, and the end of the hair was tied up with a headband, making her figure more slender and sexy, with a protruding front and a curved back, fragrant and moving. It's really worthy of Sister Siyu, she has become so sexy after growing up. A sighing voice came from the crowd. Sister Siyu is a beauty after all, and it's not surprising that she can grow up like this in the future. Why are you only concerned about her future appearance, and don't you see what kind of evaluation the ancestral land has given her? A female disciple came from the side and gently scolded, as if she was a little speechless that this group of male disciples were only concerned about the beauty and completely ignored the key points. Look at Master Mu, his eyes never wavered from beginning to end, and now he has his hands behind his back, with a calm and indifferent smile. At this moment, Musian is indeed quite calm and indifferent. The black robe is embroidered with gold and silver threads, luxurious and elegant, and it remains motionless despite the sea breeze. Of course, it's not that Musian doesn't like beauty. Musian gently stroked the chain of desolate time that was stirring behind him, raised his head and stared at Yesiu in the mirror, and said seriously, "Is this what Sister Siu will look like when she grows up? But how can we determine what kind of inheritance qualifications she can get?" Yalingxian gently hooked her fingers, and the chain of the wasteland quietly left from behind Musian and went into Yalingxuan's sleeves. She looked up and stared at Yesiu in the distance, and said nonchalantly, "Everyone who steps into the mirror will be evaluated by the ancestral land. The higher the grade, the better the inheritance that can be obtained in the ancestral land. So that's it?" Musian nodded slightly. At this time, a layer of ripples suddenly appeared on the surface of the mirror, and then Yesiu disappeared silently in front of the mirror. As if knowing Musian's doubts, Yalingxian said, "Sister Siu has entered the ancestral land." As soon as the voice fell, an ancient text suddenly appeared on the picture in the mirror. 10th grade. The result of Yesiu's bloodline evaluation is 10th grade. There was an uproar in the crowd immediately, and many people were a little surprised, but this result was also expected. Yesiu is the younger sister of the Queen of the Forbidden Zone. She was sealed in the formation by a group of elders and was left to wake up from her deep sleep in this life. She was able to make so many elders in the clan go to great lengths, so naturally she has amazing talent. Sister Siu is indeed worthy of her name. She is probably the person with the most perfect Forbidden Zone bloodline besides the young lady. Yagan has also passed by. Suddenly someone said. People looked up at the young man who was flying in front of the mirror. He stood in the mirror, and the man who appeared in the mirror was also handsome. And the final evaluation result was the 9th grade. People were not very surprised by this result. After all, both Yagan and Yesiu were people with strong Forbidden Zone bloodlines, which was also within their expectations. Musian did not immediately step forward to conduct the test, but stood by and observed the Forbidden Zone disciples who stepped into the mirror one after another for a while. When each Forbidden Zone disciple stepped into the mirror, it took almost no time for the mirror to immediately show the future appearance of that disciple. Soon after that, the mirror gave the bloodline assessment results, allowing those disciples to enter the ancestral land. Being able to show the future of others, I wonder what secret technique this reincarnated queen used to achieve this level. Musian couldn't help but sigh in his heart. "Miss, it's your turn," one of the elders on the side couldn't help but remind her gently. For Yalingxian, both the elders and disciples in the restricted area respected her. First, it was because of Yalingxuan's identity, and second, the girl did not have the arrogance of these ancient family disciples, at least her attitude was still very polite. And such politeness naturally made the elders of these restricted areas quite fond of her. Yalingxian nodded slightly, and then, under the gaze of everyone, she walked towards the mirror on the sea. The discussions just now were all silent, and the eyes of everyone, including Musian, fell on the girl in the purple skirt. The sound of the waves stopped silently, and even the sea breeze seemed to freeze. In the vast sea area, it seemed that only the sound of Yalingxuan's footsteps on the mirror could be heard. Huh! At this time, Musian suddenly heard the doubtful voice of the fairy in the green skirt in his heart. "What's wrong?" Musian asked. "There seems to be something strange about her." The fairy in the green skirt said softly. "Warm tips: if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter report error or contact us at the bottom to inform us. We will deal with it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding." After the voice fell, under countless gazes, the appearance of the person in the mirror appeared in people's vision. The whispered discussion just now was silent in an instant. The woman in the mirror was wearing a purple long skirt, and her exquisite and flawless melon seed face was more mature and sexy than the current Yalingxian. But what is really important is not this, but... Musian stared at the woman in the mirror. The appearance of the woman slowly overlapped with the woman in the stone tablet he had just seen. The future appearance of Sister Lingxian is so similar to that of the reincarnated queen. It should be said that she is worthy of being the most perfect heir to the ancestral land of our clan. The young lady's bloodline is indeed the most concentrated one in history. An elder stared slightly, obviously thinking of something, and couldn't help but sighed softly. At this time, a brilliant golden light quietly lit up in the mirror, covering Ye Lingxian. This mirror did not perform a rating this time. Or in other words, Ye Lingxian's bloodline does not need the result of the evaluation at all. This scene shocked the eyes of the restricted area disciples present, especially when they saw the future high and mighty queen in the mirror. Their eyes were even more yearning, and jealous of Musian. The future Ye Lingxian will become the queen Ye of the restricted area, and as Ye Lingxian's husband, just thinking about it makes people envious. When thinking of this, many people's eyes can't help but look at Musian. Ye Lingxian also looked at the boy not far away. Her eyes seemed to be more gentle, her red lips slightly parted, and she whispered, "Brother Mu, why don't you try it too?" Musian nodded slightly. He didn't really have a strong desire to enter the ancestral land, but he was somewhat interested in what his future self would look like in the mirror. Inject a wisp of spiritual energy, and then it will show what you will look like in the future, Ye Lingxian explained with a smile, looking very happy. This is no wonder. In the past, she had always worried about what to do if her breasts were still small when she grew up. And the self just shown in the mirror has a mature and sexy figure. Although the size of the future development is not as full as Sister Ruoxi, she is already very satisfied. Musian's test seems to have begun. Not far away, an elder noticed the spiritual energy emanating from Musian and immediately spoke. Hearing this, several elders looked up and watched Musian inject a wisp of spiritual energy into the mirror. Only those with forbidden blood can step into the ancestral land. But even if Musian does not have forbidden blood, through this mirror, you can see what Musian will look like in the future. After all, this is also the Taoist partner of their young lady, so what his future will be like is naturally of some concern. Time passed silently, but after Musian's spiritual energy was injected into the mirror still did not respond for an unknown amount of time. However, because of the previous test experience of the reincarnation pool, this time, people did not speak immediately and still waited patiently. Unknowingly, 2 incense sticks of time passed. And the mirror still did not respond, just like an ordinary mirror, only reflecting Musian's current appearance, but never showing his future appearance. It seems that Musian does not have the blood of the restricted area and is not recognized by the ancestral land, someone couldn't help but say, and he breathed a sigh of relief. Since Musian came to the restricted area, he has made a lot of noise. Now that the ancestral land has not recognized Musian, it is naturally a little relieved. And Musian looked down at the mirror in front of him, and the young man in the luxurious black robe in the mirror, and fell into deep thought. If he hadn't seen people entering the mirror one after another before, he would even suspect that it was just an ordinary mirror. It seems that Brother Mu does not have the forbidden blood, Ye Lingxian whispered to herself, but there was a trace of doubt in her eyes. But even if he does not have it, it should not show Brother Mu's future appearance. Logically speaking, even if there is no forbidden blood, stepping into this mirror will reflect the future appearance, but why does this mirror not reflect Musian's future appearance? At this time, the mirror under their feet changed quietly without knowing it. The mirror showed a barren land, and at the end of the barren land, a woman in a plain white dress was standing there quietly. Her face was extremely beautiful, but people could not tell what she looked like. Whenever they looked up and saw her, they would have a thought, this woman is so beautiful. Then they lowered their heads, and immediately forgot what she looked like. Reincarnation Queen Ye Lingxian stared at the woman in the ancestral land and said softly. Musian stared at the woman in the mirror. The woman's eyes were extremely deep, her figure was excellent, her skin was white, and her slender hands were now bound by a golden chain, seemingly unable to move. The chain of desolate time. This should be a scene from the past. The real reincarnated queen had long been wiped out in the long river of history, and now the chain of desolate time is also in Ye Lingxuan's hands. Such a beautiful woman, I wonder what she was thinking before she died. Musian looked at the woman in the mirror with some emotion in his heart. While Musian was still feeling emotional, disciples from the restricted area stepped into the ancestral land behind him, and the lively sea area just now suddenly seemed a little empty. Musian was about to look away with emotion. At this moment, he suddenly saw the woman in the mirror slightly raised her eyes and stared quietly ahead. What is she looking at now? This thought flashed through Musian's mind, and he subconsciously raised his head to look at the woman in the mirror. When his eyes fell on the reincarnated queen, they happened to be staring at her. After a brief hesitation, Musian felt countless goosebumps on his body, and subconsciously took a half step back, horrified. Damn, she is staring at me. But it stands to reason that it has been so long, the spirit of the reincarnated queen should no longer be in the ancestral land. Musian suppressed the throbbing in his heart, turned his head and looked at Ye Lingxian, saying, Sister Lingxian, the reincarnated queen should have passed away, right? Ye Lingxian nodded slightly. In the past, the elders of the clan and even my father have confirmed that the spirit of the reincarnated queen no longer exists in the ancestral land. Why did Brother Mu suddenly ask such a strange question? Ye Lingxian asked curiously. Musian hesitated for a moment and said in a voice transmission, I felt like she was looking at me just now. Ye Lingxian was stunned for a moment, then shook her head helplessly and smiled. Brother Mu is too sensitive. If the reincarnated queen is still alive, it is impossible for her to have been silent in the ancestral land all this time. Ye Lingxuan's voice suddenly stagnated because she heard a pleasant and unfamiliar voice coming from her ear. She slowly raised her head and looked at the woman in the mirror. The woman in the mirror was wearing a plain white dress, and her dress was quite casual, but it was hard to hide her proud figure. If you look closely, you will find that the woman in the mirror is almost the same as Ye Lingxian when she grows up. And just now, she clearly heard the woman in the mirror calling her. When Ye Lingxian raised her head again in disbelief, she happened to see the woman in the mirror raising her hand and gently waving in their direction. The reincarnated queen who should no longer exist in this world is greeting them. Ye Lingxuan's face paused for a moment, staring at the woman in the mirror. Could it be, she is really still alive? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 207. If the reincarnated queen is still alive, why has she never appeared before? Even the last time she went to her ancestral land, she had never seen her before. Ye Lingxian looked at the woman in the mirror, but such thoughts flashed through her mind. When she returned to the restricted area in the past, she had visited this ancestral land, but she had never seen the reincarnated queen at that time. Could it be that she will only appear when the inheritance begins? While Ye Lingxian was thinking about such things in his mind, several elders not far away were also looking at this place. They looked at each other and saw horror in each other's eyes. The previous appearance of the Qing Emperor and even the subsequent Thunder Tribulation had given a huge impact to several elders. What's more, before the Qing Emperor went through the tribulation, he actually kissed the young lady's Taoist companion in front of the young lady. But now, before they could even recover, they learned an even more shocking news: the reincarnated queen might still be alive. Did I see it wrong, or was she really waving to us just now? The third elder looked at the woman in the mirror with a slightly stunned look, looking unbelievable. She is not waving to us, she should be saying hello to the young lady. The great elder on the side spoke slowly, but his turbid eyes also shone with surprise. If the reincarnated queen was really awakened by the young lady, then just thinking about how amazing the young lady's talent is. Why did Musian follow him into the mirror? At this time, the female elder Ye Ying suddenly said, with a bit of weirdness in her eyes. The other people's eyes narrowed slightly, and they suddenly saw Musian, who was in front of the mirror just now, but now he had disappeared from the field of vision, as if he had never appeared before. Disappearing with him was Ye Lingxian, who was by his side just now. Musian also entered the ancestral land. But since he doesn't have the forbidden bloodline and has never been recognized by the ancestral land, how did he enter the cave? An elder beside him frowned. There seems to be something weird about him. Didn't the reincarnation pool also recognize him before? Chaos bodies are indeed rare, but it doesn't make sense why the reincarnation pool recognized him and gave him several spiritual energy. And in the discussion among the old monsters, a faint voice suddenly sounded slowly among them, even if the reincarnation pond does not recognize him, it may not disapprove of the person in his body. As the great elder's voice fell, the other elders who had never been near the reincarnation pool before looked at the old man and said, "What do the great elders mean by this?" The great elder raised his eyelids slightly and said calmly, "You think that Musian should not be recognized by the reincarnation pool. This is naturally understandable. However, have you ever thought about why the master never restricted Musian's movements from beginning to end, allowing him to freely enter and exit the reincarnation pool?" After the words fell, several elders frowned slightly and their eyes flashed slightly. It is indeed a bit strange for the great elder to say this. At first, they thought that the reason why Musian appeared in front of the reincarnation pool was because Musian had reached some kind of agreement with the owner of the restricted area. But not long after that, a vast thunder disaster ushered in front of the reincarnation pond. That was the thunder tribulation of the Qing Emperor. The third elder's thoughts suddenly stopped for a moment, and he quietly raised his head and stared at the first elder, saying, "The Qing Emperor is in Musian's body." This guess made the other restricted area elders who were thinking about the matter freeze up for a moment. After a long time, they thought about what had happened recently, and finally took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. If that's the case, it's really not surprising why he can enter the ancestral land now. With the Qing Emperor's methods, it is not difficult to send Musian to the ancestral land. At this moment, several elders were relieved. The great elder never spoke, but looked at the two people who had already entered the ancestral land in the mirror, with a somewhat strange look in his eyes. The reason why Qingdi came to the restricted area was presumably to use the reincarnation pool to reshape her spiritual consciousness. Now that her purpose has been achieved, it stands to reason that there should be no need to enter the ancestral land again. If Musian asked her, maybe she would help. But what if Musian didn't ask Qingdi for help? For example, when Musian entered the ancestral land, it was not the Qing Emperor who was secretly helping him, but the reincarnated queen. How about that? This guess was too shocking, so the great elder did not speak, but silently looked at the huge mirror, his eyes flashing with unconcealable surprise. Is this the ancestral land? I didn't expect it to look so deserted. At this time, Musian had already entered this ancestral land with Ye Lingxian. They were in a desolate land with no sight of mountains and rivers. There was only chaos in front of them, as if the world had not yet been opened. Ye Lingxian nodded silently. This is the case with the ancestral land. According to rumors, this ancestral land is a cave created based on the environment where the reincarnated queen lived in the past. So, the environment the reincarnated queen lived in the past was such a chaotic place. Musian whispered to himself, then looked around. He found that except for him and Ye Lingxian, there were no other disciples in the restricted area at all. It's strange. We obviously entered the ancestral land together, but why didn't we see Sister Siyu and the others? Musian said to himself. Ye Lingxian was also a little surprised and said softly, "Last time I came in with my mother and two elders from the clan, and at that time we were all in the same area. It seems that after entering the ancestral land, which area you will be in is completely random." Musian understood Ye Lingxian's words. Then, he tried hard to recall the appearance of the reincarnated queen in his mind, and at the same time secretly looked at Ye Lingxian. Although he has now forgotten what the reincarnated queen looks like, there is still a consciousness in his mind. The reincarnated queen and Ye Lingxian will look almost exactly the same when they grow up. After reincarnation, could it be that Sister Lingxian is? A very ridiculous guess came into Muzian's mind. Brother Mu, why are you staring at me? Ye Lingxian noticed Muzian's strange look and couldn't help asking. It's okay, let's keep walking. Muzian came to his senses, shook his head and smiled. When you accept the inheritance, I can leave with peace of mind. Hearing this, Ye Lingxian was about to move, but suddenly stopped abruptly. It usually takes more than half a month to receive an inheritance, and since Ye Lingxian has the most perfect bloodline in the history of the restricted area, the time for her to receive an inheritance will naturally be much longer. If we find a reincarnated queen to accept the inheritance now, we may not see Muzian for nearly a month or even 2 months. However, it was naturally impossible for the reserved and elegant Lingxian girl to say such words. At this time, Muzian put a hand on Ye Lingxuan's head, gently stroked her hair, and said softly, "Every farewell is for a better reunion in the future. Sister Lingxian, your strength will become stronger and stronger in the future. Sooner or later, Brother Mu will be unable to keep up with you. By then, I may not be able to protect you, but if your strength can continue to improve, I will also look at you with joy." Under the touch of Muzian's warm palm, Ye Lingxuan's eyes softened unconsciously. She raised her head and looked at Muzian, showing a slight smile. "Isn't that just right? Then I can protect Brother Mu. If Brother Mu is willing, you can live in the restricted area in the future." When he said this, the lock of desolate time in his sleeves popped out his head for some unknown reason, shaking his head, as if to say, "Is there any work to do?" Muzian stroked Ye Lingxuan's hair with one hand and held the lock of desolation with the other hand. At the same time, he looked up at Ye Lingxian and said with a smile, "Well, let's talk about it later. I always feel like this Lingxian girl has been showing signs of becoming dark ever since she obtained the lock of desolate time. No, maybe there were signs of blackening before, but because there was no lock of desolate time at that time, it was not obvious." No matter what, with Muzian's comfort, Ye Lingxian calmed down a little and continued walking towards this desolate land. Not long after, a beautiful back figure gradually appeared in front of them. She was wearing a simple white singlet with her hands behind her back. Under the simple white singlet was a sexy figure that made people's hearts beat. She just appeared in their field of vision silently. Muzian secretly scanned it from top to bottom, and then said softly, "The reincarnated queen." Although he could not remember the appearance of the reincarnated queen, he still had several labels on the reincarnated queen in his memory. For example, sexy, cold, bright breasts and thin waist, long hair reaching calves, white unlined clothes, etc. Based on these labels, he could determine that this person was the reincarnated queen. There is no doubt that the woman in front of me is the woman in the mirror just now. Although her clothes are quite simple, she is indeed a beauty. No matter how simple she is, she still has an indescribable charm. Ye Lingxian and Muzian looked at each other, and then Ye Lingxian looked up at the woman in front of her and tentatively shouted, "Senior, are you the reincarnated queen?" The woman turned her head slightly and looked over. Only now did Muzian finally see her face clearly. Exquisite and flawless oval face, long and curled eyelashes, plump and soft waist, soft and delicate body, even slender jade-like legs, and those delicate jade feet. She is almost exactly the same as Ye Lingxian as an adult. She stared at Ye Lingxian and said softly, "I am not the reincarnated queen." Ye Lingxuan's face was obviously filled with doubts, and she said, "Didn't you leave the restricted area? Who else can appear in the ancestral land besides the reincarnated queen who created the restricted area?" However, the woman still shook her head gently, "The restricted area is not left by me." After she finished speaking, She did not explain, her eyes fell deeply on Musian, and she slowly said, "Qing Emperor, how long will you continue to peek inside his body?" As the words fell, a fairy wearing a blue dress and graceful feet quietly appeared beside Musian in the ancestral land. Sister Fairy makes people feel at ease when they are around. Musian sniffed the faint mint-like fragrance coming from beside him, and felt that his impetuous heart just now calmed down. Just seeing the fairy in the green skirt and hearing her voice can make people calm down no matter how anxious they are at first. This fairy in the green skirt has such charm. The fairy in the green skirt looked at the woman in front of her with a smile and said, "No wonder I always feel that there is something weird about Sister Lingxian. So that's it?" When she said this, her green and transparent eyes glanced at Ye Lingxian beside her inadvertently, with a somewhat strange look in her eyes. "I thought Ye Lingxian was a killer whale calf, but no one thought this was the reincarnation of a mosasaurus. What does Sister Fairy mean?" Musian had no choice but to ask. His brain was receiving so much information at once that it was difficult to digest. "The person who left the restricted area is not the reincarnated queen you said." Fairy Kinkan turned her head and looked at Ye Lingxian beside her, and said softly, "The person who left the restricted area and even this ancestral land is you. Ye Lingxian is the true daughter of destiny." So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 208. This cave, and even the restricted area, were all left by Sister Lingxian? When hearing the truth from Fairy Kinkan, countless question marks seemed to pop up in Musian's mind. "This senior, isn't she the reincarnated queen?" Musian looked at Fairy Kinkan and asked. Fairy Kinkan nodded slightly, "She is the reincarnated queen. But not completely. This fairy is very good at keeping people in suspense, teasing people's appetite. I don't know if she only does this in this situation, or if she does this when doing other things." After listening to Fairy Kinkan's words, Musian immediately came to this conclusion in his heart. If he suddenly does this when practicing dual cultivation with her in the future, deliberately teasing others' appetite, it's uncomfortable to think about it. Although he thought about it, Musian quickly suppressed the messy thoughts in his mind, looked at Fairy Kinkan, and humbly asked, "What does Fairy Sister mean by what she said?" Ye Lingxian also looked at Fairy Kinkan. Although she didn't speak, it was not difficult to see the curiosity in her eyes from her eyes. Although she hated and even bore a grudge against the green skirt fairy's previous behavior, which was no less than n.t.r in public, she had to admit that in terms of knowledge, this immortal empress was far more knowledgeable than their younger generations. The green skirt fairy was suspended in the air, her long green skirt outlining her slender and sexy figure, and her temperament was like the fairies in Guanggan Palace, which was hard to reach. When she noticed the two people's gazes, Fairy Kinkan smiled slightly, swept her eyes from Ye Lingxian, and then fell directly on Musian, saying, "She is not the real reincarnated queen, but a puppet created by the reincarnated queen. She has no self-awareness because the real reincarnated queen did not give her consciousness, but only left a setting." Fairy Kinkan looked up at the woman in white clothes and said, "That setting is waiting. She is waiting for a real inheritor to step into the ancestral land and complete her mission." "Sister Lingxian is the real inheritor," Musian said subconsciously. Then, combined with what Fairy Kinkan said just now, there was a little more surprise in his eyes, saying, "So, Lingxian is the reincarnated queen." If according to what Fairy Kinkan just said, the restricted area was left by Ye Lingxian herself, and this puppet was set up by someone a long time ago and left in the ancestral land, waiting for someone to come. Who is the person the puppet is waiting for? Now the answer is obvious. The puppet is waiting for the person who created her, who is also the most perfect successor in the restricted area. Ye Lingxian is the reincarnated queen. The fairy in the green skirt nodded slightly, her eyes always fixed on the puppet in front of her, and said, "It's probably not wrong." Ye Lingxian also stared at her slowly, until she saw the puppet nodded silently, and then there was a little more realization in her eyes. She was also very surprised about this truth, but for some reason, she was not unacceptable. From childhood to adulthood, Ye Lingxuan's cultivation speed has been superior to her peers. And this cultivation speed is not just a little faster, but it is 3 times or even 5 times faster than her peers. Such a demon's talent speed, even the master of the restricted area was also surprised. Because of this talent, Ye Lingxian has been called the first genius of the restricted area since the beginning. She is the real daughter of destiny. But she didn't expect that she would be the reincarnated queen. At this moment, Ye Lingxian couldn't help but feel a little complicated. After accepting the inheritance, is she still herself? Musian suddenly asked. The puppet nodded silently. She is a brand new self in every life. After 9 lives, she can achieve the supreme Dao fruit. From then on, she will not reincarnate again, but will live forever. The Dao cultivated by the reincarnated queen needs to go through 9 lives of hardship, and finally resonate with the great Dao and achieve the supreme Dao fruit. And Ye Lingxian in this life is the end of this Dao. Sister Lingxian is so powerful. Musian subconsciously looked at the purple-skirted girl beside him and couldn't help but exclaimed. Although he had known that Ye Lingxian was also the protagonist for a long time, and even knew that her background was very deep, he never thought that the origin of this girl was so amazing. This feeling is like, he just saw this fish because it looked good and turned it into his own fish pond, and then one day he suddenly discovered her identity and talent, and suddenly realized, oh, it turned out to be a killer whale calf. Then after digging deeper and the truth came to light, he suddenly realized again, NMD, it turned out that this was a young mosasaur. No wonder the chain of desolate time flew into Ye Lingxuan's hands the moment the inheritance was opened. That ancestral weapon was originally Ye Lingxuan's weapon, so after waking up, he would naturally go to see Ye Lingxian first. Among the people he knows now, in addition to the reborn, there is actually another reincarnated person. Musian's heart is extremely complicated, and he even has some concerns. He even began to wonder if there are any travelers among the people he knows. Who knows if the other party will suddenly talk to him about modern computers or something like that one day. And, there is a huge hidden danger at the moment. Chain of desolate time. This weapon can slow down time, and Ye Lingxian seemed to have the idea of wanting to tie Brother Mu to her side, so the chain of desolate time is a little restless. If she truly accepted the inheritance of the reincarnated queen and became the queen of Ye, will she put her idea into action? While Musian was still thinking about this question, the clear and pleasant voice of the fairy in green skirt suddenly sounded. Since you are a puppet set by Sister Lingxian, why did you invite him into the ancestral land? The he she was talking about was naturally Musian. Musian's eyes moved slightly when he heard it, and he also looked up at the extremely beautiful puppet. She calmly told the truth, we will need his furnace in the future, so we have to give him a spiritual energy now. The fairy in green skirt had a little more surprise in her eyes, and said, if I guess correctly, you have been reincarnated for 9 lives, and each life should have formed a special spiritual energy hidden in your body. What you are talking about is the spiritual energy accumulated in one of the lives. The puppet nodded silently. Aren't you afraid that he will leave Sister Lingxian later? The fairy in green skirt asked. The puppet looked at Ye Lingxian and said, the desolate time lock has locked him, so it doesn't matter. The desolate time lock, once this chain marks someone, no matter if that person is in Dongzhou or Bizhu, or even in the more distant western regions, he will be brought back by the chain. Ye Lingxian now naturally doesn't have such a powerful means. But the future? Why does it sound like the desolate time lock is some kind of super long-range ancestral weapon? Musian listened to the conversation between the two, and for some reason, he felt something was wrong in his heart. At this time, the puppet's eyes fell on Musian and continued, if you don't want to accept it, you can refuse it. The special aura that has been condensed for 5,000 years, such a treasure, no matter who hears it, will be moved. But, from the other party's tone, this aura is prepared to be stored in the Tiansheng furnace and returned to Yelingxian in the future. Why is it so troublesome? Muzian is not sure. However, if this spiritual energy is in his Tiansheng furnace, it will also be of great benefit. Tiansheng furnace was originally composed of spiritual energy, but Muzian's various adventures later strengthened Tiansheng furnace continuously, so that now Tiansheng furnace has completed evolution again and again. And now if he gets the spiritual energy left by one of the 9 lives of the reincarnated queen, even if this spiritual energy is to be returned to Yelingxian in the future, his Tiansheng furnace can be further strengthened during this period. Well, although this strengthening has nothing to do with Muzian at all. Happiness belongs to others, and he has nothing. The fairy in the green skirt moved her small red lips slightly, and transmitted the voice, "Accepted, this spiritual energy will be of great use to you in the future. If you can understand the Tao that the reincarnated queen realized in that life, you will be much easier when you experience the state of enlightenment in the future. This spiritual energy is in the Tiansheng furnace, and Muzian really can't get any benefit, but the avenue contained in this spiritual energy is what Muzian will need in the future. I do intend to accept it." Muzian also sent a voice message. "Whether it's for me or for Sister Fairy." The fairy in green skirt was slightly stunned. After looking at Muzian, she couldn't help but pursed her lips slightly and said Yelingxian glanced around and noticed that Muzian and fairy in green skirt were staring at each other. Her delicate eyebrows frowned inadvertently. For some reason, she always felt that the two of them seemed to be hiding something from her. This feeling made her feel very bad. On the other side, Muzian, who was chatting privately with fairy in green skirt, felt quite relieved when he saw the ripples in the eyes of this fairy. "Look, what is meant by water dripping through stones and moistening things silently? This fairy is indeed high above, and is also a female emperor respected by the world. But if you are more sincere, you will have a chance to pursue her." At least the words just now did seem to make the contemporary empress somewhat moved. When Muzian just thought of this, he suddenly felt a cold touch on his wrist. He looked down subconsciously, and the chain of desolate time quietly wrapped around one of his wrists. After a brief silence, Muzian suppressed his inner thoughts, pretended to be indifferent, turned his head and looked at the doll, and said, "Senior, I am willing to accept the spiritual energy you give me. Whether it is for me or for..." Muzian stopped talking, just silently glanced at Yelingxian. Just one look, but people can clearly feel the deep affection and tenderness contained in it. Yelingxian retracted her gaze as if she was electrocuted, stood with her head down, and gently raised her bare hand. The chain of desolate time, which was wrapped around Muzian's right hand and seemed to be ready to move, quietly returned to Yelingxian's sleeve. "I'm sorry, Brother Mu. It's the first day that the desolate time lock has just recognized its master. It seems that it's still a little difficult to control it. It's not that I just had any ideas." Yelingxian apologized softly. I understand. What bad intentions can Sister Lingxian have? She is just a good sister who loves her brother." Muzian shook his head gently and smiled, "I know, everything is the problem of the desolate time lock. Sister Lingxian has no problem." After that, he looked at the puppet and said, "Senior, when will the inheritance ceremony begin?" "It will start right away," the puppet answered. Muzian nodded slightly, then looked at Yelingxian and said, "Sister Lingxian, are you going to start the inheritance ceremony now?" The puppet nodded again. Yelingxian suddenly looked at the puppet and said, "If Brother Mu wants to leave the ancestral land, can you wake me up? I want to send him away from the ancestral land at that time." The puppet was silent for a moment, then nodded. "Although this will delay the time of inheritance, since it is the master's order, she will naturally not disobey. Delaying some time will not affect the integrity of the inheritance, so it doesn't matter." The fairy in the green skirt looked at the two of them, but did not disturb them. Instead, she stood not far away and watched the scene quietly. Her posture was always calm and each movement was very elegant, with the special charm of a mysterious elder sister. 3 days passed before she knew it. It took Musian only 3 days to accept the inheritance. In the final analysis, what he received was not inheritance, but just one of the spiritual energies stored in his natural furnace. As the spiritual energy of one of the reincarnated queen's lives entered Musian's natural furnace, Musian immediately felt an inexplicable Daorime lingering in his body. This was the Tao of the reincarnated queen's life, and after this spiritual energy entered Musian's body, this Daorime could also be felt by Musian. Sure enough, following the protagonist means being able to drink soup, Musian slowly opened his eyes, feeling the spiritual energy containing the Daorime in the natural furnace, and couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Yelingxian beside him also slowly opened her eyes. She was awakened by the puppet. "Brother Mu," Yelingxian shouted crisply. Musian turned his head and looked over. Yelingxian stood up with her hands on the hem of her skirt and walked towards him gracefully. "After going to Yaokai this time, if you encounter danger, remember to make sure you are safe first," Yelingxian said softly. Musian smiled gently, "Don't worry, I know. It is very happy to be cared for by others. And my ability, don't you still believe it?" Musian continued. Yelingxian nodded slightly and smiled, "I believe in Brother Mu's ability." Then, her eyes inadvertently glanced at the fairy in the green skirt not far away. She was standing not far away at this time, looking at them calmly. Looking at the calm figure of the fairy in the green skirt, Yelingxian's mind couldn't help but recall what happened in front of the reincarnation pool that day. Her eyes returned to Musian, her eyes flickered slightly, and then one hand gently pressed the back of Musian's head. Just like the fairy in the green skirt did last time, she leaned forward slightly and gently pressed her soft cherry lips on Musian's lips. The slightly cool and soft touch made Musian slightly stunned, until he saw Yelingxian's shy eyes flickering slightly because of this action. His mood was agitated, and he also responded to Yelingxian's kiss. Although Yelingxian did not apply any rouge, she was Yelingxian after all. Even without any powder, her kiss was still delicious. The fairy in the green skirt stood not far away, staring at the scene silently. After an unknown amount of time, the two separated their lips. Yelingxian exhaled a sweet and soft fragrance from her little mouth. In this way, the smell that the Green Emperor left on Brother Mu last time became hers. When she thought of this, Yelingxian inadvertently glanced at the fairy in the green skirt in the distance. Although she was extremely ashamed in her heart, and even her pretty face was a little flushed, the girl's eyes still had a bit of desire to win. She loosened her arms around Musian's neck, took 2 steps back, tilted her head slightly to look at the fairy in green skirt, and smiled, "I'll trouble you from now on, fairy sister. Don't worry." At this time, a voice like the sound of nature floated in the ancestral land. The fairy in green skirt's jade feet were half suspended on the ground, as white and warm as a rare piece of white jade, slightly cool and beautiful to the touch. She used her green jade fingers to push aside the hair on her forehead, and gazed at Yelingxian. "After going to Yaokai, I will take good care of your Taoist partner." So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 209. After the fairy in green skirt returned to her own natural furnace, Musian also prepared to leave the ancestral land. Yelingxian was a reserved and elegant girl. Although she was reluctant, she would not show it too obviously. She only watched Musian leave before retracting her gaze and continued to accept the 9 generations of inheritance from the reincarnated queen. Her current strength is not too strong. Although she has excellent talent, the other girls she knows are also very talented. Bairuoxi and Weimengru have already reached the refining god realm, and senior sister Lan has entered the return to void some time ago. Only by accepting the inheritance this time can she have a say among these girls in the future. Moreover, the chain of desolate time is determined by the realm of the owner. This is the ancestral weapon of the restricted area, but in the past and until now, no one has actually exerted its true power. Because this ancestral weapon is the weapon of the reincarnated queen, only its true owner can exert its true effect. In the future, as his realm improves, the power of the desolate time lock will be greater. Even if Musian is not in Dongzhou, Ye Lingxian can still use the desolate time lock to bring him back to her side in the future. When Ye Lingxian closed her eyes and officially started the inheritance of the reincarnated queen, Musian had just walked out of the ancestral land on the other side. It was not until now that he knew that it was the doll that sent them into the deepest part of the ancestral land. Now that he walked out of that area, a huge area came into view. In this area, Musian saw many familiar people, all of whom were disciples of the restricted area. He also saw his future aunt among them. Her face was extremely beautiful, bright, and beautiful. The dark-colored long skirt pressed out a beautiful buttocks arc, and her brown hair was scattered on her back. There seemed to be a faint black mist on her body, mysterious and attractive. At this time, she closed her eyes slightly, as if she was practicing in seclusion, so Musian did not disturb her, but left directly. At this moment, a pleasant voice suddenly came to my ears, "The breath on your body seems to have become much more delicious. When you go to Yaokai, you must protect yourself and don't let others steal it." Yesiu is a Holy Spirit body, which is similar to a natural spirit body. She is very sensitive to spiritual energy. At this moment, she vaguely noticed the change in Musian's temperament. "Don't worry, Auntie, I will protect myself." Musian showed a gentle smile and replied in a voice transmission. Although this woman looks a little arrogant, she is actually not bad by nature. Because of Ye Lingxian, she still treats him as her own. Those who treat him with a friendly attitude, Musian will naturally give the same friendly attitude. Besides, he is still quite interested in his aunt. Soon after leaving the ancestral land, Musian saw the yellow skirt beauty standing outside the ancestral land. She didn't know when she stood in the shadow. If she didn't pay attention, she might not even notice her existence. "Sister Mengru, when did you come?" Musian stepped forward and greeted with a smile. "Yesterday," Wei Mengru responded coldly. This woman always speaks so coldly, and Musian has long been accustomed to it, so he doesn't care. "When do you plan to go to Yaoqi Holy Land?" Wei Mengru asked. "Take a rest and leave tomorrow," Musian answered after a moment of silence. According to the words of the Yaoqi saint, the Tiandan phoenix fruit has not yet borne fruit so soon, and there is no point in going to Yaoqi Holy Land in advance, so they are not in a hurry to go there. Musian turned his head and looked at the mirror on the sea behind him, and said, "Sister Mengru, have you tried that mirror? The mirror can show a person's future appearance. Although the cultivator can control his own appearance and maintain his age, Musian is still very curious about what Wei Mengru will look like in the future." Seeing Wei Mengru gently shaking her head, Musian asked tentatively, "Do you want to try it?" "Sister Mengru, aren't you curious about what your future will be like?" Musian coaxed. Wei Mengru really hesitated, and after a while, she nodded silently, "Okay." Although this mirror cannot allow people without the bloodline of the restricted area to enter the ancestral land, its ability will also have an effect even on people outside the restricted area. Watching Wei Mengru slowly walking towards the mirror, Musian suddenly asked, "Fairy sister, do you want to try it?" This mirror cannot reflect the future of the Hedeo realm, and it's useless to try. The voice of the green skirt fairy sounded lightly in Musian's heart. "Then why can't I see it either? Could it be that I am also in the Hedeo realm?" Musian asked without understanding. "The mirror should be left by the master of the restricted area or the reincarnated queen. It can reflect the past and the present, but if it is above the enlightenment, it is difficult to show. In addition, if a person's secret is blocked by someone, it will not appear in the mirror either, the green skirt fairy replied. Fairy sister means that my secret is blocked by someone. Musian looked at Wei Mengru in the distance and asked subconsciously. It's just possible, but not necessarily. Musian heard this and couldn't help but fall into deep thought. If my secret was blocked by someone, who did it? Could it be Miss Ling Long, the foodie? Musian's mind flashed with thoughts, thinking about such things. At this moment, the picture in the mirror quietly changed as Wei Mengru stepped forward. Musian looked in the mirror, and what appeared in the mirror was not Wei Mengru's future appearance, but a picture. The picture showed a woman walking on a street full of ruins, with burning stone pillars occasionally collapsing from midair. The woman was wearing a simple robe, but under the simple dress, the delicate oval face was still attractive, but the eyes seemed to have lost some luster. Who is this person in the mirror, looks so similar to Sister Mengru? Musian's eyes were filled with doubts. Judging from the background, it didn't seem to happen in Dongzhou. No. These ruins don't look like buildings in this world. And what are the words on them? Musian soon discovered that there seemed to be some words on those buildings. Words that did not belong to the Dogon dynasty. What on earth is this? Click. When Musian's mind was flashing, he suddenly heard the crisp and pleasant sound of the mirror breaking. Let her come back. This mirror can't continue to reflect. If it goes on like this mirror will completely shatter. The voice of the fairy in the green skirt came softly in Musian's heart. Sister Mengru, come back soon. Musian immediately sent a message to Wei Mengru, who was standing in front of the mirror. Wei Mengru seemed to wake up from the sudden realization just now, and slightly turned her head to look at Musian. Then, she calmed down and flew towards his direction. At the same time, a crack on the mirror was quietly repaired. The artifact has a spirit, and this mirror is also a spirit. When it is damaged, it can repair itself, but it just takes some time. Looking at Wei Mengru flying lightly from the mirror on a sword, Musian couldn't help but have a little more doubt in his eyes. What period was the picture in the mirror just now? Why did Wei Mengru reflect that picture when she stood on that mirror? As if knowing Musian's question, the fairy in the green skirt spoke softly. There are no two identical leaves in the world, but there are leaves with similar shapes, and there may be some relationship between these two leaves. In other words, the woman reflected in the picture just now may be someone similar to Sister Mengru, Musian thought thoughtfully. It seems that the secret of Wei Mengru is much bigger than he imagined. Since he got the bronze piece, he has added a reborn person to his title. And the bronze piece was absorbed by Wei Mengru, so it seems that Wei Mengru should be a reborn person. Such a guess is logical. But from the current performance, Wei Mengru does not look like a reborn person. At least, Musian can't see how Wei Mengru meets the characteristics of a reborn person. What's wrong? Wei Mengru raised her head slightly and asked Musian when she noticed that he was staring at her. Isn't it beautiful enough to take a closer look? Musian smiled. In short, even if we are in a hurry, we can't find out the truth all at once, we can only do it slowly. At least we can be sure that the maid is very loyal, that's enough. As for the secret of Wei Mengru and even the picture just seen in the mirror, we can investigate slowly. Just now, Musian saw a text that did not belong to the Dogon dynasty on those ruins. That kind of text is more like that left by the ancient dynasty. Maybe we can consider going to the library after this and ask the knowledgeable pavilion master Yan if he knows that kind of text. Thinking about this, Musian returned to the small courtyard where he lived with Wei Mengru. In the morning of the next day, he temporarily left the restricted area. The top priority now is to reshape the cauldron and immortal body for the fairy Kinkan, and other things can be put aside for the time being. As long as the Qing Emperor is there in the future, his safety will be more guaranteed. The Holy Land of Yaokai was once one of the top forces in Dongzhou, and it witnessed the succession of dynasties from generation to generation. Even after the departure of the Green Emperor 1,000 years ago, the Yaoqi Holy Land still ranked among the top in Dongzhou. The Green Emperor's tribulation this time shocked the 9 provinces, and the entire Dongzhou even experienced an unprecedented earthquake. A few days ago, some ancient families began to send people to secretly test the Yaoqi Holy Land. That was a female emperor in the Hedao realm. If she was really still alive, what kind of changes would she bring to Dongzhou? No one could imagine. However, the only thing that is certain is that the Yaoqi Holy Land will definitely become one of the top forces in Zhizhou, on par with the Forbidden Area. There have been various versions of the legend of the Green Emperor from ancient times to the present. These versions are different, but there is only one version that is completely consistent, that is a beautiful fairy. It stands to reason that the Green Emperor has already become an emperor, and there are only 2 thunder tribulations in the Hedao realm. She will go through the thunder tribulation again. It is obvious that there was something wrong with her body before in the Holy King city near Yaoqi. Many people gathered here at this time, discussing this matter. They were all cultivators from various major families in Dongzhou who had come here after the Green Emperor passed the tribulation, as well as independent cultivators who did not belong to the ancient families. Although the Green Emperor's thunder tribulation was in the restricted area, some ancient families were keenly aware of some abnormalities. They concluded that the Green Emperor might have some problems, and Yaoqi would definitely heal the Green Emperor at all costs. This can be seen from the defense of the heavenly Dan Phoenix tree in Yaoqi Holy Land during this period of time. It is rumored that the Tiandan Phoenix fruit has the magical effect of regenerating broken limbs and resurrecting the dead. Qingdi disappeared for 1,000 years, but this time she survived the physical tribulation in the restricted area. If nothing unexpected happens, she will probably have to survive the soul tribulation again. Yaokai will probably not exchange any Tiandan Phoenix fruit this year, someone said. Every few years, the Tiandan Phoenix tree in Yaokai Holy Land will bear fruit once, and there will be about 5 or 6 Tiandan Phoenix fruits each time. If Qingdi is really ill, the Tiandan Phoenix fruit this time will definitely be left to Qingdi by Yaokai Holy Land. If Qingdi is reborn, the situation in Dongzhou will probably be completely rewritten in the future, a casual cultivator said with a somewhat interesting tone. I'm afraid all these cultivators from the ancient families are here for Qingdi this time. Which cultivator who came to the Holy King city this time is not here for Qingdi? Another casual cultivator on the side immediately laughed. Which cultivator in the world doesn't want to see the beauty of the fairy in the green skirt? Even if it's just one glance, it's enough. After all, she is the empress of the Hedao realm. Even if she can't get any immortal fate, just seeing her is enough to make people satisfied. However, in addition to the casual cultivators who hold this idea, there are also some ancient families who don't actually want the Green Emperor to be reborn. After all, the rebirth of the Green Emperor means the prosperity of the Yaokai Holy Land, which will break the current situation in Dongzhou, which is something some ancient families don't want to see. In the past few days, the Holy King city has gradually become lively. At this moment, the Yaokai Holy Land has also ushered in a small sensation. The Queen Mother of Yaokai is sitting in front of the throne, instructing several elders to activate the formation in Yaokai. If the Green Emperor comes to Yaokai in the future, it must be ensured that she will not be disturbed by the outside world when she condenses the cauldron. Although the ancient families in Dongzhou are quite friendly to Yaokai, it does not mean that they can watch a female emperor in the Hedao realm be reborn and sit in Yaokai. Just as the Queen Mother of Yaokai was instructing the elders to prepare the formation in an orderly manner, a maid in a palace skirt came to the spacious and bright hall eagerly and said in an excited tone, "Queen Mother, Musian is asking for an audience outside Yaokai." The Queen Mother of Yaokai's eyes lit up immediately, and the Yaokai saint, who was sitting not far from the stage, had a slightly more excited look on her face. Fairy Yao Xian's eyes were a little strange, and she muttered, "Did he really come back from the restricted area smoothly?" Since the Qing Emperor's tribulation a few days ago, Fairy Yao Xian knew that Musian had successfully obtained the reincarnation water for the Qing Emperor. A cultivator in the realm of refining spirits actually persuaded the master of the restricted area. If the truth had not been in front of her, she would even find it hard to believe that this was the fact. The Queen Mother of Yaokai stood up quietly. She was extremely beautiful, like a plump peony flower, with a graceful figure. Although she was already a beautiful woman, she had a mature charm that a girl did not have. At this time, she stared at the maid, and her calm tone was a little solemn, saying, "Take me out to pick him up." Hundreds of forces from all over Dongzhou gathered in the Holy King City. On this day, countless eyes secretly watched the Holy Land of Yaokai. Because, since Muzian entered the Holy Land of Yaokai that day, the monks in the Holy King City heard a rumor. That rumor was suspected to have come from Yaokai. And that rumor, which was only one sentence, caused a sensation in the entire Holy King City. The Green Emperor returned to the Holy Land of Yaokai. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 210. Muzian didn't know what happened in the Holy King City, and the excitement had nothing to do with him. At this time, Muzian had just arrived at Yaokai Holy Land, and was led by the Queen Mother of Yaokai to a spacious and bright hall. The floor of this hall seemed to be filled with fairy spirit and white mist. At the end of the hall, there was a throne. On both sides of the throne, there were a row of stone tables carved from white jade. In front of the white jade table, nearly a dozen elders from the Yaokai Holy Land were already sitting. Some of these elders have gray hair, while others look like young women, full of mature charm. Muzian saw two acquaintances among them. One was Yaokai Saint Yao Yu, and the other was Fairy Yao Xian, who had wanted to invite him to Yaokai Holy Land in advance. The two fairies are graceful and complement each other. One looks mature and steady, with a light silver glow on her snow-white skin. Fairy Yao Xian, on the other hand, looked much more lively. At this moment, her big eyes were looking at Muzian with a complex expression. After all, when she invited Muzian to the Yaokai Holy Land before, she also said that it was impossible for Muzian to obtain the reincarnation water in the restricted area. Who would have thought that in less than half a month, Muzian would have obtained the water of reincarnation, allowing the Qing Emperor to reshape his immortal body? Muzian looked around, then raised his hands and clasped his fists, looking polite. Junior Muzian, I have met all the seniors. Muzian already had some immunity against these elders. After all, when he was in the Liangyi sect, he had often faced several leaders. However, Muzian still did his best to be as humble as he should be. You're welcome, Mr. Mu, please sit down. The Queen Mother of Yaokai sat in front of the throne and said with a smile. This mature and sexy beautiful woman is dressed in a luxurious robe, with a golden walking stick in her hair. There seems to be a holy light shrouding her back, making her skin extra white and firm. Muzian sat generously next to the Yaokai saint on the left, and then gave her a kind smile. Little friend, didn't Qing Emperor come back with you? At this time, an elder suddenly asked. Muzian followed the voice and looked at the elder who spoke, and smiled. Senior Kingdi is cultivating his spiritual consciousness in my cauldron, but he should be awake now. After the words fell, many people adjusted their sitting postures slightly, and the Yaokai saint beside them looked at the young man wearing a black and gold robe intentionally or unintentionally. Ever since she learned the secret of Muzian's natural cauldron, she could more or less understand why the Qing Emperor chose to hide in Muzian's cauldron. Whether his natural furnace is used for cultivation or for nourishing spiritual consciousness, it is an irresistible temptation. She didn't know what Kingdi was thinking, but at least on her side, when she noticed the spiritual energy in the Tian cauldron, she was indeed a little moved in a rare way. At this time, the Queen Mother of Yaokai suddenly said, "This time my little friend came to my Yaokai, I was supposed to have a banquet to entertain you, but unfortunately this time the heavenly pill phoenix fruit is of great importance. The banquet can only be left until the heavenly pill phoenix tree bears fruit. This time, it can be said that the Tiandan phoenix fruit in the Yaokai Holy Land is being stared at by countless people from the outside world. The reason is also very obvious. Some time ago, almost everyone in Dongzhou knew that the Qing Emperor had overcome the tribulation, and some ancient families even realized the importance of the heavenly pill phoenix fruit to the Qing Emperor. If he secretly sabotages the heavenly pill phoenix tree when it bears fruit or robs the heavenly pill phoenix fruit, it is very likely that the Qing Emperor's plan to revive will be ruined. Under such an important situation, the manpower of Yaokai Holy Land was naturally assigned to the Tiandan phoenix tree. Muzian nodded slightly to express his understanding. Then, he suddenly asked, speaking of which, is most of Yaokai's combat power now concentrated at the Tiandan phoenix tree? The Queen Mother of Yaokai nodded slightly. I don't know much about Muzian and the Yaokai Holy Land, but since he is someone whom Qing Emperor trusts, there is no problem, so there is no harm in telling him. Young friend Mu seems to have something to say. An elder saw something in Muzian's words and couldn't help but ask. Muzian pondered for a moment and said, actually, you can consider withdrawing some of your manpower. Before anyone else could ask, Muzian continued, the people who will be eyeing the heavenly pill phoenix tree this time are bound to be the ancient families who are no weaker than or second only to the Yaokai Holy Land, and they want to do it secretly. There may be more than one ancient family, and the Yaokai Holy Land will leave its personnel near the Tiandan phoenix tree, and there will probably be a lot of casualties. For the sake of Senior Qing Emperor, we have already had the corresponding awareness, so there is no need for you to persuade me. Little friend Mu Queen Mother of Yaokai slowly shook her head. At this time, Fairy Yao Xian held her fragrant chin in her hand, looked at Muzian a few times, and said, if possible, I, Yaokai, don't want to have any casualties, but no matter what, there can't be any mistakes in the Tiandan phoenix tree. She paused and continued, or, Mr. Mu, does he have any better solution? After the words fell, the eyes of other elders also fell on Muzian, and the eyes of the Yaokai saint were also fixed on the young man beside her. With Muzian's character, he shouldn't say such thoughtless words. He just suggested that some of the people in Yaokai Holy Land should be evacuated. Maybe there is a better way. Although this possibility is very low. After all, he is a monk in the God-refining realm. In this situation, he cannot change the overall situation at all. At least that's the case based on the cards currently on the table. The method is not worthy of mention. Muzian shook his head slowly and said, I, a young monk in the God-refining realm, can't protect the heavenly pill phoenix tree from being destroyed. However, just because I can't do it, it doesn't mean that Senior King D can't do it either. The atmosphere in the hall solidified for a moment. It was not until a long time later that Fairy Yao Xian frowned slightly and said, even if Senior Qing Emperor reshapes his immortal body now, he still doesn't have a cauldron. How can he use spiritual energy to suppress foreign enemies? If the Qing Emperor reshaped the cauldron, Muzian would have said this, but now the Qing Emperor has just reshaped his immortal body, and the cauldron within his body has not yet condensed, so how can he suppress the foreign enemies? He thought he had some way. If he could rely on Qing Emperor, then the Yaokai Holy Land wouldn't have to worry for so long, and he would even sacrifice his ancestral weapon to drive back the enemies who were peeping in the dark. If Qing Emperor can take action, one person can suppress them all. But the problem is that the current Qing Emperor does not have a cauldron, so how can he suppress the enemy? Muzian shook his head and smiled. In fact, people in Yaokai Holy Land, and even people from the outside world, have fallen into a misunderstanding. The Qing Emperor indeed did not have a cauldron, and even those ancient families who were hiding in the dark also knew about this. Because the Qing Emperor had to overcome the tribulation of the physical body before, and it stands to reason that the Qing Emperor was already in the Hedao realm, so why did he need to go through the tribulation again? Some old monsters have basically guessed the truth. The Qing Emperor reshaped his immortal body. Therefore, the current Qing Emperor needs the heavenly pill phoenix fruit. Under normal circumstances, it would indeed evolve into the result that the Yaokai Holy Land sacrifices the ancestral weapon and defends the heavenly pill phoenix tree to the death. But the thing is, these are not normal times. Museon's existence itself is the best answer to this dilemma. The premise is that Qing Emperor is willing to nod. The Queen Mother of Yaokai quietly withdrew her gaze, shook her head slowly and said, "Young Mu Mu probably doesn't know much about the Hedao realm. The current Qing Emperor does not have a cauldron, so he cannot use spiritual energy. Your kindness, Yaokai, will definitely repay you later. As for other matters, just leave it to us. You have done enough for Emperor Qing." As the words fell, a clear and sweet voice suddenly sounded in the hall. "Actually, the suggestion he just said, I think it is a good idea." The atmosphere in the hall was stagnant. Almost at that moment, several eyes looked at Museon's side at the same time. The fairy in the green skirt was floating quietly in the air at some point. She has a flawless fairy posture, as if she has no desire to eat the fireworks of the world. At this time, her jade feet seemed to be stepping on the void, and there seemed to be ripples under her feet. There is a rhyme in her voice. Just hearing this voice makes people feel relaxed and happy. It is difficult to there is a hint of blasphemy in my heart. Senior Kingdi, Yaokai Saintess almost blurted out, her calm eyes filled with excitement for the first time. Fairy Yao Xian's eyes were also focused on the fairy in the green skirt, and the admiration in her eyes could not be concealed. Several elders of the Yaokai Holy Land stood up one after another, and the Queen Mother of Yaokai also stood up and looked at the supreme grace of Fairy Kinkan with celestial flesh and jade bones. Then, the Queen Mother of Yaokai recalled what Qing Emperor had just said, and couldn't help but said, "Could it be that your cauldron has already condensed?" Kingdi agreed with Museon's suggestion just now, which also meant that she was planning to take action to suppress all the enemies who coveted the heavenly pill phoenix fruit. Does that mean that the Qing Emperor now not only has an immortal body, but also condenses a cauldron? However, before the joy on the faces of the elders fully emerged, Fairy Kinkan calmly said, "The cauldron has not condensed yet. However, there are still ways to obtain spiritual energy." When she said this, she stared at Museon quietly, and what came to her mind was Ye Lingxuan's previous action of kissing Museon in front of her. Fairy Kinkan did not explain to the others, but changed the subject lightly. "It's getting late, it's almost time to rest. Is my old bedroom still there?" she asked warmly, her voice clear and beautiful. "Now, after you left, servants cleaned your palace every day without slacking off," an elder with a white beard said excitedly. The Queen Mother of Yaokai looked at the Saint of Yaokai and said, "Yao Yu, Mr. Mu is tired from traveling and traveling. Please take him to stay in my guest room in Yaokai for one night." Fairy Kinkan shook her head slightly, with a faint smile on her face, and said softly, "You don't have to worry about his affairs." The Saint of Yaokai was stunned for a moment, and subconsciously looked at the fairy in the green skirt, about to ask for the reason. At this moment, Fairy Kinkan spoke again, "Let him live in my palace tonight." The lively voice just now fell silent for a moment, and several eyes looked at Fairy Kinkan blankly. The eyes of the Saint of Yaokai flickered slightly, as if she had thought of something. She slowly raised her head and looked at Museon in disbelief. Facing these glances, Fairy Kinkan seemed not to notice. She just tilted her head slightly, her rosy mouth moved slightly, and there was a faint smile on her eyebrows. "Since you just proposed that plan, then you should be responsible to the end, right? Warm reminder, if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter error or contact us at the bottom to inform us. We will handle it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding." So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 211. From ancient times to the present, the state of harmony has been the lifelong pursuit of cultivators. The name of Kingdi is the most beautiful in the world, and her beautiful and charming appearance has attracted countless people. The return of Kingdi this time naturally shocked the entire Yokai. And this time, hundreds of forces in the Holy King City gathered together. I don't know how many eyes are secretly staring at Yokai, and there are some malicious eyes among them. Since a month ago, Yokai Holy Land has been secretly preparing to deal with powerful enemies. They have made preparations. As long as they can make Kingdi return, no matter how much they pay, it is worth it. However, at this moment, Kingdi agreed with Musian's plan and asked the people of Yokai Holy Land to withdraw most of the defenses in the Tiandan Phoenix Tree area. And this Kingdi just said that his cauldron has not been reshaped. Without the cauldron, how to suppress the enemy? Even now, a group of elders, and even the Queen Mother of Yokai, have some doubts and concerns. But since it was the words of the Green Emperor, as the leader of Yaoqi, the Queen Mother of Yaoqi naturally nodded slightly and said, "In this case, then follow the words of the Green Emperor. I will send you back to the palace first." When she finished speaking, the beautiful woman glanced at the handsome and gentle young man next to the fairy in green skirt and smiled, "Young friend Mu, you come with me." "Thank you," Senior Musian nodded with a smile. The Saint of Yaoqi watched the two of them leave under the guidance of the Queen Mother of Yaoqi. There was a bit of strangeness in her eyes, and she looked deeply at the fairy in green skirt. The Green Emperor just said that her cauldron has not yet condensed, but he also said that he has a way to get spiritual energy. For some reason, after hearing this, she had a not so good guess in her mind. If this guess is spread out, it will even make people feel a little absurd. But since he is the Green Emperor, he must have his own plans. They, the younger generation, can only believe the Green Emperor. The Saint of Yaoqi stared at the beautiful figure of the fairy in the green skirt leaving, and finally suppressed the messy thoughts in her heart, turned her head to look at Wei Mengru beside her, and showed a faint smile. "Miss Mengru, please follow me." Wei Mengru silently glanced at the young master, then retracted her gaze, nodded slightly, and followed the Saint of Yaoqi to the guest room where she had lived recently. When the two walked in front of the corridor, the Saint of Yaoqi suddenly asked, "Miss Mengru seems to be always with Mr. Mu." Wei Mengru said softly. She didn't talk much, let alone in front of outsiders. "Then do you know what the relationship between Senior Kingdi and Mr. Mu is?" the Saint of Yaoqi asked tentatively. Wei Mengru shook her head gently and said, "The Green Emperor has always lived in his cauldron and rarely appears. I don't know if they usually have any communication." That being said, the maid knew almost everything about her young master's depth. Musian never concealed anything in front of her. After all, the maid knew all of Musian's past black history, including when he found which courtesan and which lady he was intimate with. I think it was for this reason that Musian simply gave up and opened up completely in front of Wei Mengru. However, what Wei Mengru said was indeed the truth. She didn't know what the relationship between her young master and the Green Emperor was. She could only guess roughly. That fairy was not as beautiful and pure as the outside world saw, because she was probably also black-bellied. However, these things had nothing to do with her. On her side, it was enough for her to do her own thing. On the other side, Musian followed the Queen Mother of Yaokai and walked in a long corridor. The fairy in the green skirt stepped on the soft lichen with exquisite embroidered shoes. Her steps were light and graceful, as if she was strolling in the garden. She looked around and seemed to have nostalgia in her eyes. The Queen Mother of Yaokai walked in front, the golden hairpin in her hair swaying gently with her steps. Although the current ruler of Yaokai Holy Land looked over 30, she had a beauty and plumpness that a girl never had. But it should be said that she was worthy of being a cultivator. Her skin still looked tight, and her body was not out of shape at all. Instead, she exuded a calm and mature charm. Although she was not as beautiful as the Green Emperor, her temperament and even appearance were much better than most women. Musian followed behind, also looking around, occasionally glancing at the plump figure of the Queen Mother of Yaokai in front of her, and the fairy in green skirt not far away. After a while, he retracted his gaze, raised his head to look at the environment of the bedroom, and his eyes quickly fell on a formation that did not seem obvious. From this point of view, the formation of Yaokai Holy Land has been fully activated, Musian understood slightly in his heart. He had read some books about formations when he was in Lianji sect before, so now he could roughly see that the formation in Yaokai Holy Land had already been activated. Obviously, for the matter of Kingdi this time, Yaokai Holy Land has completely entered a state of preparation. Charcoal was burning in the bedroom, and the room was filled with a faint sandalwood. The palace was warm like spring, and there were several maids on each side, extremely respectful. "You can leave first." The voice of the fairy in the green skirt sounded lightly in the bedroom. The formation can also be partially lifted, so there is no need to put too much burden on others. The Queen Mother of Yaokai nodded slightly, and then gave a look to the maids. As the maids left, Queen Mother Yaokai's eyes fell on Musian, and she said softly, "My dear friend Mu, this time thanks to you, Yao Qi will definitely repay you for this kindness in the future." Musian shook his head and smiled. Senior Kingdi suppressed the first generation of Demon King at all costs for the people of Dongzhou in the past. Now I am honored to be able to help. Besides, I have been taken care of by the head of Huabao Peak. Speaking of it, I have a cause and effect with Yao Qi. The head of Huabao Peak of Lianji sect is the biological son of Queen Mother Yao Qi, and Musian learned this from Yan Ruya before. Therefore, Musian was a little surprised when he saw this beautiful woman before, because from her dress and even her face, her age could not be seen at all. Queen Mother Yao Qi showed a gentle smile, but before leaving the palace, she couldn't help but look at Musian deeply. From the past to now, there has never been a person of the opposite sex living in the bedroom of the Green Emperor. Musian is the first one. She didn't know why the Green Emperor let Musian stay in the bedroom. Was it just to protect him, or, Musian had other great uses? Thinking about this, the Queen Mother of Yaokai turned around and left the bedroom. After everyone left, the green skirt fairy walked into the bedroom. She was wearing a green long skirt, draped over her body like a tulle. Her snow-white skin seemed to be shining with moonlight, her back curves were graceful, her slender jade neck was looming, snow-white and crystal. Under Musian's gaze, the green skirt fairy sat sideways on the soft couch. Her expression was extremely calm from beginning to end, as if nothing could move her. Nervous, she raised her head, her green eyes gazed at Musian, and her voice was full of moving Taoism. There are also many cultivators in the Return to Void realm among the various schools of thought and ancient families in the Holy King City. Countless eyes are secretly staring at the Yaokai Holy Land, waiting for the result of the Tiandan Phoenix Tree. Some are simply here to join in the fun, wanting to pay homage to the Green Emperor and see his supreme style, while some do not want the Green Emperor to be reborn, hoping to stop the Tiandan Phoenix Tree from bearing fruit. Musian, a young cultivator who just left Tianqian City and went to Lianji sect for less than half a year, is understandable if he is a little panicked when encountering such a big scene. Musian nodded gently, indeed, a little. Young Master Mu used to strategize and play with people's hearts. After entering Lianji sect, he also played with people's hearts. Of course, after entering Lianji sect, he did not play with people's hearts, but Miss Bai's hearts. In short, no matter what, in the face of absolute strength, some political schemes and tricks will seem a little powerless. Fairy Kinkan seemed a little surprised and couldn't help but look at Musian twice more. "I thought you would explain yourself." According to her original expectation, Musian should have shaken his head to deny it now, not wanting to embarrass himself in front of other opposite sexes, but she didn't expect him to nod so calmly, indicating that he was indeed nervous. When the thought flashed through the mind of the fairy in green skirt, Musian suddenly smiled and said, "After all, this is the first time I've been in the same room with a fairy." Looking at the fairy in green skirt's brief silence, Musian couldn't help but smile and continued, "With Sister Fairy here, what should I worry about? The Green Emperor has not yet condensed the cauldron, but the Green Emperor has him. To suppress foreign enemies, this little bit of spiritual energy is enough." The fairy in green skirt stared at Musian silently, and her green eyes never changed. "It's just that the atmosphere in the room seems to have a bit more haziness and ambiguity that can't be explained." After sitting in the room for a while, she raised her head slightly, looked at the hazy moonlight outside the window, and said faintly, "The moonlight is nice tonight, accompany me to relax." Musian understood the atmosphere very well and nodded slightly. The border of the east continent of Yaoqi Holy Land is located in a quiet environment. In the past, cultivators often chose to take a short rest in the nearby Holy King city before leaving when passing through Yaoqi. And these days, because of the Qing Emperor's tribulation, the quiet environment on weekdays has become a little more peaceful before the storm, which seems a little depressing. However, this does not affect Musian or Qing Emperor. While walking, the two unknowingly came to the courtyard of Yaoqi. In the courtyard, a towering tree supported its branches and leaves, and the moonlight fell through the gaps between the branches and leaves, revealing a hazy beauty. "Is this the Tiandan Phoenix tree?" Musian stood by the pool, looking at the ancient tree in the center of the pool, and couldn't help asking. He could feel the spiritual energy in the ancient tree, which was concentrated in several places on the ancient tree. The fairy in the green skirt looked up at the Tiandan Phoenix fruit, nodded slightly, and said, "This tree was originally a seed I brought from the land of chaos. After thousands of years of evolution, it grew to this point. Every few years after that, it will bear fruit once, but sometimes it won't bear fruit. Tens of thousands of years." Musian repeated, and couldn't help but secretly look at the beautiful side face of the fairy in the green skirt. The moonlight fell, making the fairy, whose skin was already shining with silver, more attractive. Her exquisite and graceful figure was hidden under the gauze-like green skirt. She gave people a sense of flawless distance. She was obviously close at hand, but she made people feel that she was standing in the Nine Heavens Palace, which was out of reach. This kind of hazy beauty was the most heart-moving, and coupled with the crisp fairy sound, it felt like it was tickling people's hearts, making people want to find out. This fairy in green skirt has been around for tens of thousands of years. If one life is 5,000 years, then she has already experienced 3 lives. "You seem to be thinking about something rude." Fairy in green skirt glanced at him lightly, her voice as clear as the collision of jade, although her tone was calm, but she made Musian aware of the danger. Musian pretended not to notice, standing by the pool reflecting the moonlight, looking up at the Tiandan Phoenix tree, and smiled, "I was just thinking, the road to immortal cultivation is long. I don't know how long it will take me to catch up with the fairy's pace. If you just practice without any opportunity, it's probably impossible in this life." Fairy in green skirt said softly. Immortal cultivation not only pays attention to talent and diligence, but also to immortal fate, which is why Lianji sect tested the luck of disciples in the past. But even if you have talent, diligence, and luck, it is still too difficult to reach the end of the road to immortal cultivation and advance to the Hedeo. Only a few people can reach the end on this road. Although it's the truth, it's a bit too depressing. Musian shook his head helplessly. "It's the truth, isn't it?" The fairy in green skirt smiled brightly, which seemed to dim the moonlight a little. "Opportunities are usually left by predecessors, and this is the way to go further and further on the road of cultivating immortals," she continued. Musian turned his head to stare at the beautiful profile of the fairy in green skirt, and sighed softly, "In fact, I know the gap between me and the fairy, and I have never asked for anything." He retracted his gaze, put his hands behind his back, slowly raised his head, looked at the hazy moonlight, and said, "I just hope that many years later, the fairy can still remember that in your life, there was such a little cultivator who admired you." He quickly shook his head again, and smiled helplessly. "Sorry, I seem a little sad tonight. I shouldn't tell you these words. It will only make the fairy upset." However, the fairy in green skirt just turned her head slightly to look at Musian, with a faint arc at the corner of her mouth. "You know, the path I take can make others naturally like me and treat me sincerely. Similarly, I can also feel a person's true feelings." Why didn't you say it earlier?" Musian looked at the moonlight with a calm expression, and he seemed as steady as an old dog, but in fact, he was a little nervous. "But you are indeed sincere, but not just to one person," Fairy Kinkin said again. When she said this, she turned to Musian, raised her fingertips, and placed her slightly cool and soft hands on Musian's face. Then, under his puzzled gaze, with a faint smile between her eyebrows, she whispered, "Close your eyes." Again. Musian was stunned for a moment, but under the gaze of Fairy Kinkin, he closed his eyes. And then, he soon felt a slightly cool and soft touch kissing his lips gently. Musian opened his eyes and saw Fairy Kinkin staring at him quietly. "What do you think would happen if your lover saw it?" At this moment, the voice of the fairy in green skirt suddenly came to his ears. "Who is the lover you are talking about?" "I have quite a lot of lovers," Musian complained in his heart, but for some reason, his heartbeat accelerated a bit. And this subtle change was also seen by the fairy in green skirt. For a moment, a trace of joy seemed to pass through her eyes. But soon, this joy was broken by a breath from the outside world. The fairy in green skirt glanced slightly in a certain direction on her side, and then casually retracted her sight, as if she didn't notice it. On the other side, Musian stared at the fairy in green skirt's beautiful face with a faint blush, and boldly put one hand on the fairy in green skirt's slender waist, gently hugged her in his arms, and felt the beauty brought by this fairy body. Then, he was about to taste the soft lips of the fairy in green skirt in a more proactive way. However, at this moment, his natural spirit made him immediately aware of something unusual, and Musian glanced at a corner beside the yokai. It looked like the first guest of the night had arrived. Warm reminder, if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter error or contact us at the bottom to let us know, and we will handle it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding.